Alright, so gather around and listen closely. I've got a collection of stories for you. Tales of things that went wrong, of moments where the world felt tilted and unsafe. Pay attention to the details, because that's where the real fear lives. This is the first story. When I was 9 years old, I was staying home alone. It was early in the morning. I had just gotten out of the shower and brushed my teeth. I'd put on my favorite outfit, a pink t-shirt and denim shorts, and set up a little area for myself in the living room with a glass of juice and a bowl of cereal. I turned on the TV to watch cartoons. Then the phone rang. I walked across the house to the kitchen to answer the wall-mounted phone. The voice on the other end was a man's. It was a familiar and comforting voice, deep and calm. He asked me about my day so far, and we made small talk. After about a minute or so, he said, "I like your outfit. Is pink your favorite color?" I replied, "Oh, thank you. No, it isn't." "What were you planning on watching on TV?" he asked. It took me a few seconds to understand what was happening. I was only 9 years old and very naive. The voice on the other end of the phone then changed completely. It became deep and raspy and horrific. The voice then proceeded to describe, in graphic detail, all the horrible things he wanted to do to me. I went numb. My skin felt as if it were on fire, and my heart was racing. I had never been more terrified in my entire life. I slammed the phone down, and then, with shaking hands, I called my mom at her office. I tried to explain what had happened, but I'm not sure I was making much sense. She got on to me for answering the phone in the first place, and then told me to just go back about my day. I remember trying to explain to her that he was watching me, that he knew what I'd been doing, and what I was wearing. I told her I was going to call 911 because I needed help. "That isn't necessary. I'm not coming home. Just don't answer the phone again and go watch TV," she said, and then she hung up. I was so confused and so scared. I could feel his eyes on me. I ran around the house, pulling all the curtains closed. I was torn between doing what I felt was right and doing what my mother had told me to do. All this time, the phone was ringing again. The second it would stop, it would just start up again. The sound of the phone ringing pulsed through my entire body like an electric current. It was paralyzing me. It felt like I was frozen but also on fire at the same time. I waited for a brief pause in the ringing, and then I called 911. I'm home by myself, and I'm 9 years old, and someone's watching me and telling me they're going to kill me, I told the operator. She tried to keep me calm and said that she would send help right away. I remember standing there in the kitchen, listening to this kind voice trying to help me, but I could feel every scary movie scenario playing out in my head. Was he creeping up behind me with a knife? Was he going to shoot me through a window? In a moment of sheer panic, I pressed the panic button on our home alarm system, and the sirens started blaring. I ran outside. I remember this sense of relief washing over me, but also this overwhelming feeling of a separation in my reality. Inside the house felt small and dark and dangerous. Outside felt open and safe and warm. I could hear lawnmowers in the distance and the sound of birds chirping. It was a beautiful day, a stark contrast to the bone-chilling feeling from the phone. A neighbor from across the street was outside pushing his young child in a swing. He saw me standing there, crying, and looked concerned. He let me stand next to him while he waited with me. I could hear the police sirens now, getting louder as they grew closer. It felt like it took an eternity, but the police finally arrived. An officer walked over to me and asked me what happened. I did my best to explain it, but so many of the words the man on the phone had used were just so embarrassing and awful. I couldn't bring myself to say such adult words to a police officer. His other words were just too bone-chilling to repeat. To this day, I can still hear my own young voice repeating, "He was watching me. He said he was going to kill me." Not long after, my mom's car pulled into the driveway. For some reason, she had decided to come home. She didn't look for me or come to speak to me. She just calmly got out of her car and walked over to the police officer. I was standing in the doorway from the garage to the house, just facing the driveway. I could see my mom and the police officer talking. I was watching them, trying to figure out what was happening. And then I saw it. My mom was laughing. My face was swollen from tears. My heart was still racing. My skin was on fire. And my mom was laughing. What was going on? Very slowly, I crept a little closer, and I overheard her say, "I'm so sorry about this." I guess she just got scared being home alone and overreacted. "I'm really sorry to have wasted your time." What was happening? Did I do something wrong? Did I imagine the whole thing? Was this a dream? Should I not have called 911? Did I actually overreact? My memory of what happened immediately after that is a little hazy. I remember refusing to stay home alone after that day, and the sound of a phone ringing would send ripples of fear through my body. I refused to talk about what had been said to me on the phone. My mom decided that she knew who did it. She said it was a boy who was my age who lived across the street. I knew that was impossible, but no matter how much I protested, I was always told that it was him. Many years later, after I was an adult with my own children, we were all at my parents' house for Christmas. Everyone was in the living room, and I had gone into a back bedroom to change a diaper. As I was walking out of the room and back towards the living room, I could hear my mom laughing. It was the sound of her telling a funny story. But the faces of everyone else in the room told a different story. They looked uncomfortable, shocked, afraid. Yet she was still laughing. It felt like I was walking in slow motion. One of my own older children actually stopped me from entering the living room and sort of pushed me back into the bedroom I had just come out of. "Grandma just told the story of you being home alone and the man threatening to kill you," my child told me. She told it like it was a joke, like some funny story from your childhood. To this day, I never learned who it was that called me. I still deal with the fear of ringing phones and talking to strangers on the phone on a daily basis. It's awful. This event occurred when I was a child. I was around 8 years old at the time. My mom, my younger sister, and I had just moved into a new apartment complex. We were really happy to finally have our own place, and for the first few weeks, everything was going pretty well. My younger sister, who was 6, and I would always play outside in the grassy area in front of our building almost every day. Soon enough, we met our upstairs neighbor. He was an older man who lived by himself, and at first, he seemed really nice to us. He would often come down and give us candy or ice cream bars from his freezer, but he always told us not to tell our mom about it. At the time, being young and naive, I didn't really think much of that. We would sit on the grass outside and eat whatever treat he had given us that day, and then he would come and collect our wrappers and trash, which we thought was really nice of him. But he would always stand there and stare at us with this really strange, wide-eyed smile on his face. I remember feeling really uncomfortable whenever he did that. One day, my family was getting ready to go to the store. While my mom was in her bedroom getting ready, my sister and I went outside to play and wait for her. After a few minutes of playing, we heard a whisper coming from the top of the concrete stairs that led up to the second-floor apartments. It was our neighbor. He was poking his head out of his front door, which was open just a crack. "Hey girls," he whispered, that same creepy smile on his face. "I've got some more candy for you. But if you want it, you're gonna have to come up here and get it." My sister and I, being the innocent children we were, got really excited. Candy was a big deal to us. We started to walk up the stairs towards his apartment. As we climbed the stairs, he kept that wild smile on his face and held a finger up to his mouth, as if he was motioning for us to be quiet. We were about halfway up the flight of stairs when my mom's voice suddenly called out from our front door, "Girls, come on, it's time to go." The man immediately slammed his door shut. My mom told us to come back down. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, she asked us where we were going. We told her that the nice man upstairs was going to give us some candy. My mom's face went pale. She grabbed both of us by the hand and pulled us inside. After that day, my mom wouldn't let us go outside to play alone anymore. Our neighbors stopped talking to us completely. Whenever we would see him, he would just turn and walk the other way. Looking back on this now, I was so foolish to take things from a man I barely knew. If my mom hadn't called out to us at that exact moment, who knows what would have happened to me and my sister. Not too long after that incident, we moved to a different apartment complex, to that really creepy man who almost successfully lured us into his home. I'm so glad you didn't succeed. All of this started happening about a year ago. I remember it was unusually warm for that time of year. For reference, I'm a female, and my husband, who we'll call Jay, and I have 3 kids at home. There's L, who was 13 at the time, H, who was 12, and G, who was 8. It was in the evening, and it was already dark outside, so it must have been close to 9 o'clock. I was just sitting on my bed watching some TV when I heard a distinct knock on my bedroom window, the one that was right next to my side of the bed. The curtains on that window were open because we had a window air conditioning unit running, and I always left them open to get the most air circulation. Jay immediately went into our backyard to check it out. The door to the backyard is in our bedroom. It's one of those add-on rooms that are common in smaller houses around here. He went out there, but he didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Our dog was with him, and she didn't bark or give any indication that someone was there. Just then, my daughter Elle came out of the main bathroom down the hall. She said she thought she might have heard someone knock on the bathroom window while she was in the shower. She was all covered in soap and wrapped up in a towel. We told her that we had just looked outside and there was nothing there, so she went back to finish her shower. No one was particularly scared by this. Our neighborhood is pretty active, and people are always outside walking around, so we just tried to reason that it was some random noise and let it go. About an hour later, Jay had fallen asleep on the couch watching TV. H was asleep in his room, which is next to L's room, and Elle was in her room, lying on her bed and looking at her phone, with her bedroom curtains wide open. Up to this point, Elle had always been really relaxed about her room's windows. I was constantly getting on her case for not closing her curtains and making sure her windows were locked. I had even found out that she was sometimes sleeping with her window open a crack so that our cat could get in and out. Jay and I were in our room watching a movie when we heard Elle let out the most terrifying scream I have ever heard in my life. It was a scream of pure, absolute terror. Panicked, Jay and I bolted up and ran to her. We met her in the living room, and she was so scared that she actually fainted right there on the floor. Elle came to after just a few seconds and told us that someone had banged hard on her window. When she looked over, she saw a man's face pressed up against the glass, staring right at her with his hands cupped around his eyes to see him better. He didn't run when he saw her look at him. He just stood there and kept staring. Jay ran to our room to get his rifle and then ran out to the front yard while I got on the phone to call the police. Jay positioned himself near the house next door, which had been empty for years. The neighborhood kids had been in there before and found old chip bags and beer bottles, but we had never seen anyone actually living there. Before the cops arrived, I took the gun back inside so I wouldn't have to answer a bunch of uncomfortable questions. The police searched my yard, the empty property next door, and the alley behind our houses, but they didn't find anything. They just told us to make sure all our doors were locked and to call them back if anything else happened. By this time, all the kids were awake and knew everything that was going on. L and G were terrified, and H was just really, really angry. H has autism and doesn't have a typical sense of danger. All he knew was that his sisters and his mom were scared, and his dad was furious. So he's just standing on the front porch, cussing up a storm into the darkness, daring the person to show his face again and vowing to beat him up. About 2 weeks later, the person came back. This time, it was just a light tapping sound. And since then, it has become a pretty regular occurrence of either tapping or knocking on the windows. One time, he even made meowing sounds, pretending to be a cat trying to be let in. I saw him once peeking through the small window on our front door. We've called the police just like they advised us, but they have never been able to catch him. We've stayed up all night, waiting in Elle's bedroom, and we never hear it on those nights. We've hidden in the shed in our backyard and in my car in the driveway, trying to catch this person outside, but nothing ever works. he's a ghost. No one can ever catch him. My kids now either sleep on the floor in the living room or in our bedroom. We don't go outside after dark anymore, and we never stay home alone. I contacted the police lieutenant who's in charge of our neighborhood. He has sent officers over and has assigned a regular patrol for our street. The police are now randomly popping up at my house to check on us and to drive by. I think it's to show whoever is doing this that they are here and they know what's going on. Whenever they come at night, they always have at least 2 cars, and they leave their patrol car lights on. The man came back last week at 2 in the morning, but Elle was too scared to get out of bed to wake us up. Elle is a teenager, and she really values the privacy of her own room, so sometimes she tries to sleep in there. Since this last time, though, Elle and G have completely stopped sleeping in their own rooms, so I honestly don't know if he has been back. He's never knocked on my bedroom window again since that very first night. I haven't been able to afford security cameras until just now. Someone on Reddit suggested I use anti-climb paint, which is apparently a type of paint that never fully dries and stains anything or anyone that touches it. After thinking about it, I'm almost certain this creep lives on my street. His escape is always so fast. No matter how quickly we get outside, he is always gone. He never does it when we have friends over, or when we went on vacation and my dad stayed at our house. He knows our cars and our routines. He has to be close enough to get away that quickly. I just have no idea what to do anymore. When I was around 13 or 14, I was really into anime. One of the streaming sites that I used had a chat box where you could talk to other people while you were watching the same anime. The chat happened to be sponsored by this online dating website. I ended up joining the website, hoping to meet some new friends because I had just moved to a new town and didn't have any friends yet, as it was the middle of summer and school was out. I met some really great people on there, and I'm still friends with one of them today at age 20. I'm actually about to attend his wedding. And then there was Timothy. Timothy claimed to be 16 years old. He loved art, anime, fan fiction, and he was largely into cosplay and the same kind of music that I liked as well. We flirted non-stop, and after about 5 months of talking, we decided to try having a long-distance relationship. This was around late November or early December. Timothy would always ask for photos of me, nothing inappropriate. Just pictures of my face, basically. Whenever I asked for pictures of him in return, though, he would always say that his webcam was broken. That was a pretty big red flag, but I was young, and I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I learned a bit more about him over time, including his addiction to adult websites and self-pleasure, which I didn't really have a big issue with. And then he began asking for really inappropriate photos of me, as well as initiating overly inappropriate and really detailed role plays. I didn't send him the photos or respond to the role plays, and I just expressed my discomfort about it. He got angry, and for a little bit, he blocked me. About a week before Christmas, he began messaging me again. This was around the first time that I saw the man taking pictures of my house. I told my mom about it, but of course, she just brushed it off. I saw him again on Christmas Day, and once again, I let my mom know about it. He was in a different car this time. He took a few more pictures, and my mom actually called the police this time. Before they arrived, she came into my room and saw me talking to Timothy on my laptop. She quickly took my laptop away from me and grounded me, telling me how dangerous it was to talk to strangers online. When the officer arrived, my mom told him what I had seen and that I was talking to this guy named Timothy online. The officer took my statement and a description of the man in the car and said that they would be watching the area. He came back for the third and final time a few days after that, and I got a really good look at him this time. The next day, my dad woke me up and had me look through this website on his computer that was full of all these men's faces. I got to about the 5th page of pictures, and that's when I saw him. My dad called the police and told me that the man was on the registered sex offenders list. After a couple of hours, another officer showed up at our house. He told us that the man on the registry didn't have access to the cars that I had described, and that they wouldn't be investigating him any further. I swore up and down that it was him, but the officer just told me that they couldn't do anything more without a warrant or probable cause. The very next day, our family dog was found dead on our back porch, with a plastic grocery bag around his head and his neck was broken. My parents, to this day, still think it was just a freak accident, that he had gotten his head stuck in the grocery bag trying to lick the meat juices off of it, and then had fallen off the porch and died. I'm not so sure though. We buried our dog in the backyard, and about a week later, the same original police officer knocked on our door to tell us that the man from the registry had fled. Apparently, he had illegal substances in his house and the police were after him for that. They had gotten a warrant and had gone through his house, which we later found out was only about a block down the street from mine. And in his house, they found the pictures of our house. Some of them were taken from inside our house, and one of them had actually been of me asleep in my bed. In another one, he had caressed my face. In another, he had partly put his private parts in my mouth while I was sleeping. The nightlight in my room illuminated everything around me. My Hello Kitty pajamas were easily visible, as well as the stuffed pig that I always slept with right next to me. They went through his computer after obtaining another warrant and found all the chat logs between him and me. He was 57 years old, and his name wasn't Timothy. I'm not going to disclose his real name for the sake of my own privacy. He has yet to be found, and he's suspected to have left the country. I live in constant fear now, and I have severe PTSD from this whole experience. This happened back in the summer of 2002. My family had just moved back to our home, state of Ohio, after a few years of my dad's job taking us all over the country. I was 10 years old, and I was thrilled to be spending the summer hanging out with my cousins, Leo and Mia, who I hadn't seen much of while we were away. It was one of those unbearably hot and humid July days where the air feels thick and sticky. We were all bored, so we decided the best escape was the local community pool. It was only about a 10-minute bike ride from my house, so we promised our parents we'd be back before dark and set off for an afternoon of swimming. Our town was small and felt incredibly safe, so our parents never worried about us going off on our own like that. We had a great time splashing around and competing to see who could hold their breath the longest. When the lifeguards finally blew the whistle signaling that the pool was closing for the day, we all reluctantly headed for the locker rooms. My older brother and my cousin Leo went into the boys' side, and Mia and I went into the girls'. I was always fast at changing, so I finished up before Mia and went out into the lobby to wait for the boys. The lobby was pure chaos. It was a big, echoey room with concrete floors that were slick with water. Parents were trying to round up their kids, and groups of friends were all shouting and trying to find each other before heading out. The noise was overwhelming, and it was tough to see anything clearly for a short 10-year-old like me. As I was scanning the crowd for my brother and Leo, I felt a hand clamp down firmly on my arm. Before I could even react, the person started pulling me towards the main exit. The lobby was so packed that I just assumed someone had mistaken me for their own child. It happens sometimes. I looked up and saw a man with thinning, reddish-brown hair. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were fixed on the glass doors of the exit. I yelled up at him, "Hey, what are you doing?" He barely glanced down. His grip tightened, and he started moving more forcefully through the crowd. We were getting closer to the doors, and a cold wave of fear started to wash over me. I shouted again, a bit louder this time, "Let go of me." He didn't even flinch. He didn't acknowledge me at all, as if I hadn't even spoken. That's when it hit me with absolute certainty. This was not a mistake. He was trying to take me. I froze. My mind went completely blank. All those stranger danger assemblies at school, all the rules they taught us about what to do, just evaporated. I tried to scream that I didn't know him, but the sound that came out of my throat was just a tiny, pathetic squeak, completely lost in the noise of the lobby. No one around us seemed to notice what was happening. I was terrified. It felt like an eternity, being dragged through that sea of people. Then, finally, my cousin Leo came out of the boys' locker room. He spotted me immediately. Our eyes met, and I think he could see the pure panic on my face. He yelled my name. He looked at the man who had a death grip on my arm, and then he screamed at the top of his lungs, "Let go of my cousin." I don't think the man was expecting that. He froze instantly. He looked at Leo, then back down at me, and his hand dropped from my arm. Without another word, he just turned and slipped back into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as he had appeared. I didn't care where he went. I was just so relieved. I ran straight to Leo, who asked if I was okay. I could barely speak. I was shaking so badly. I just nodded and clung to his arm until my brother and Mia came out. We never really talked about it after that day. I've told my husband about it, and a few of my closest friends know the story. For years afterward, I became a little obsessive, searching online for sex offenders in our area, looking through old news articles from that time, trying to find any trace of that red-haired man. I never found anything. Eventually, I just had to give up. I still hate that I just froze up in that moment. I can't believe how lucky I was that Leo came out of that locker room at the exact second he did. It's still so crazy to think about. A few years back, I was a shift manager for one of those big chain pharmacies, the kind that's also a convenience store. The location was incredibly convenient for me. It was literally right across the street from my backyard, and I could probably sprint there in under a minute if I needed to. I was in my late 30s at the time. I worked out a lot, and while I was fit, I'm still a smaller woman. Even though I was married, I would get hit on or asked out by customers pretty frequently. It was flattering sometimes, but it always made me feel really awkward. Now, this particular store was in a very strange part of town. It was just on the edge of the nice side of town, so it attracted all the demanding, entitled customers. But it was also close enough to the not-so-good side of town to attract its fair share of drug addicts, drunks, and genuine psychopaths. Let me just say that I am not someone who gets scared easily. I've had a man high on meth crash his car into the side of the building because we didn't carry the specific brand of pineapple juice he wanted. I've had another man literally pick me up, throw me over his shoulder, and start walking towards the exit, declaring that I'd make a good wife. That's a story for another time. Anyway, this particular incident started on a Sunday morning. I remember it was a Sunday because I was really busy building new promotional displays and making sale signs. I was working with my favorite coworker, so the day was flying by, and I was in a really good mood. A man and his young son came into the store, and they made a beeline straight for me. The man was probably a little under 6 feet tall and very skinny. He had long dreadlocks and a single, long silver earring dangling from one ear. He was also wearing a tan trench coat, which I found really odd because it was the middle of summer and scorching hot outside. Nonetheless, I greeted them with a smile and asked if they needed help finding anything. The man spoke with a very thick Jamaican accent. He said his car's GPS had stopped working and he wanted to know if we sold any. I let out a small laugh, thinking he was joking. I told him no. He would probably need to go to a Best Buy or a similar electronics store for that. But I pointed him towards our small electronics aisle. "Oh, thanks," he said, glancing at the aisle but keeping his eyes fixed on me. Something about his eyes just chilled me to the bone. He spoke to his son in another language while I went back to my work. But he kept calling me over to help him, asking me questions about phone chargers and SD cards. I answered his questions, and then he started telling me how beautiful I was. I got really awkward and just thanked him. He asked if I worked out. I told him I did yoga sometimes, getting more and more uncomfortable. He made a few more comments about my body and told me how much he loved my tattoos. He was just being a total creep. I tried to stay polite, but eventually I just walked away and tried to get back to my work. I started actively avoiding him, but I could feel him staring at me from across the store. The man had his phone out, and I kept hearing the distinct shutter sound of a camera. I finally went into the back office and told my coworker that I thought the guy was taking pictures of me and that I was feeling really uncomfortable. My coworker came out to the sales floor and just kind of stood near me, watching over me. Shortly after my coworker came out, the man and his son finally left. By the time my shift ended, I had mostly forgotten about him. A few weeks later, I was up at the front registers, ringing up customers with a different coworker. We were crazy busy that day, but I was the manager on duty. After we got the line down, my coworker handed me a plain white envelope. "What's this?" I asked her. "I don't know," she said. "Some guy with dreadlocks came in and told me to give it to you." My heart sank. I took the envelope and went into my office to open it. Inside were dozens and dozens of pictures of me. I had no idea any of these had been taken. Most of them were of me at work in the store. Some were of me walking home from work. And some were of me playing with my daughter in our backyard. I felt sick to my stomach. There was also a note with the pictures. It said something along the lines of, "You're so beautiful. I'm in love with you. I'd be a much better husband than what you have now. Please give me a chance." There was more to it, but the note is now in a police evidence locker. The guy had, incredibly stupidly, left his full name and address at the bottom of the letter. I immediately called our store manager and the police. They came and took the camera footage from the store, my statement, and the pictures and letter. They paid him a visit and told him he needed to stay away from me and that he was banned from the store. The next time he tried to contact me, he would be arrested. I was really relieved, but still deeply bothered by the whole thing. A few more weeks, maybe a month, went by. It was another really busy Sunday night. It was just myself as the manager on duty and one cashier. We were ringing people up together at the front when I noticed a man standing off to the side, just staring at me. The man was tall with a medium build. He had dreadlocks, and he was wearing the same long tan trench coat and had the same single silver earring as the other man. But this man was really scary. His eyes were just cold and dead and full of anger. It felt like they were staring right through my soul. He didn't have anything to purchase. He just stood there and stared. I tried to give him a polite smile, and then another wave of customers came in. I got lost in helping everyone, and when things calmed down again, I didn't see the man anymore. I decided to go to the back of the store to start facing the shelves. I told my cashier to call me if she needed me. As I was in one of the back aisles, I heard that same thick Jamaican accent again. I looked up at the security mirror at the end of the aisle and saw that same scary man on his phone. "Yeah, she's here," he was saying. "No, it's just one other girl here with her. I can grab her when she leaves." "No problem." I was absolutely horrified. He hadn't seen me, so I slowly and quietly made my way back up to the front of the store. I briefly told my coworker what was going on, and then I locked us in the office and called the police and my store manager. The cops came and took the man away. A few days later, a detective came to the store to speak with me. The two men were brothers. They had been abducting women and using them for human trafficking. The detective told me I was incredibly lucky. I later found out that when the police had searched their apartment, they had found the woman who had been beaten to death. Both brothers have since gone to prison for a very long time. This whole experience still gives me horrible nightmares. What happened to that poor woman could have easily been me. Thank God it wasn't. This happened when I was 13 years old. I lived in a duplex with my dad and my older brother. It was a 2-bedroom place, so I shared a room with my dad, while my brother had his own room. It wasn't uncommon for both of them to have plans on a Friday or Saturday night, leaving me home alone to play video games. This night was no different. My dad was out at a bar with his friends, and my brother was who really knows where. I was in the living room, playing the original Resident Evil on my PlayStation. Around midnight, my eyes were getting really heavy, so I decided to turn off the console and go to bed. I always slept with my bedroom door wide open. Not one single time in the years we lived in that place did my dad or my brother ever come home by entering through the sliding glass door in the back. There were a couple of times when my brother forgot his key and knocked on my bedroom window to ask me to let him in, but my dad always had his key and always came through the front door. On this particular night, I was lying in bed when I heard the back door slide open. It was an old, heavy door, and opening it was not an easy or quiet task. It made a loud grinding sound, so I heard it crystal clear. I lay in bed, my eyes wide open, my imagination already running wild. I heard whoever it was walk through the small dining room, then through the kitchen, and then into the living room. They made no attempt to be quiet. After a brief pause, I saw a large silhouette walk past my open bedroom doorway. This scared the living hell out of me. My heart started pounding in my chest. Whoever was in my house walked into the bathroom, which was right next to my bedroom, and then flipped on the light switch. The bright light from the bathroom poured into my dark bedroom, and I was just lying there, completely terrified, feeling totally exposed by the light. You're probably wondering why I didn't shout for my brother or my dad. It was because I knew, with absolute certainty, that it wasn't them. And there was no one else it could have been that would have made any sense. It wasn't a family member, and it definitely wasn't a friend. I just knew that it was someone who did not belong in my house. The person then walked out of the bathroom but left the light on. They went into my brother's room and started making a ton of noise. It sounded like they were rummaging through his things, searching for something. All I could do was lie there, shivering under my blankets. After a few more minutes, the person walked by my bedroom doorway again. I expected at any moment that this stranger would turn and walk into my room. They didn't. I heard them making noise in the living room, walking around, huffing and puffing. Then they started walking back and forth right past my open bedroom door, over and over again. Into the bathroom, then back out, into the living room, and then back again. At the time, I was 100% sure they were messing with me, that they knew I was in there. From the heavy footsteps and the huge, broad-shouldered figure I saw in the doorway, I knew it was a man. He continued walking around every single room in the house, except for the one I was in. Then, just as suddenly as it started, I heard him walk back through the house to the sliding glass door in the back, slide it open, and leave. I lay there in bed, completely terrified, wondering what in the hell had just happened. After a long time, out of sheer exhaustion, I finally fell asleep. In the morning, I found that my dad and brother were both home. I have asked both of them about that night dozens of times over the years, but they both swear it wasn't them. Plus, again, why would they come in through the back door only to leave again through the same door a few minutes later? This was about 21 years ago. I'll never know who that was or why they were there. Nothing was stolen or even out of place. What really makes me wonder to this day is why they never came into my bedroom. The door was wide open, and they walked past it at least 20 times. It just doesn't make any sense. When I was 16 or 17 years old, I had a summer job as a lifeguard at a private pool in my neighborhood. It was a members-only club, and each family was assigned a member ID number. You could buy guest passes for your friends. During the summer, on Friday nights, we had an event called Friday Night Cheers. A local band would play. All the adults would gather around the bar area and drink, and all the kids would get to swim late until about 10 in the evening. One night, while I was working one of these events, I was stationed at the diving well. There was this one guy and his friend who kept trying to splash me every time they went off the diving board. I didn't think anything of it. Every kid who comes to the pool tries to splash the lifeguard. It's practically a rite of passage. As it was getting close to closing time, I started my cleanup duties, going around and wiping down all the tables. The guy from the diving board started following me around the pool deck, trying to make small talk. I'm a pretty friendly person, so I had a conversation with him. He told me his name was Chris and that he was 19 years old and home from college for the summer. Then he asked me for my phone number. I told him no, explaining that I don't give my number out to strangers and that I also had a boyfriend. He wouldn't stop asking, insisting that he just wanted to be friends. I finally just had to walk away and go sit in the guard shack to get away from him. A couple of days went by, and I was working a normal afternoon shift, and he was there again. As lifeguards, we're not really supposed to have long conversations with people while we're on duty, so I just ignored him. He eventually stopped talking, but He just kind of hung out in the water in the section right in front of my guard chair. A coworker came to relieve me so I could rotate to another station, and the guy got out of the pool and followed me. I kept ignoring him. This continued every single day he came to the pool. One day, I got a text message from a number I didn't recognize. I asked who it was, and what do you know? It was the guy from the pool. The only way I can figure he got my number was from the work schedule, which was hanging on a clipboard in the guard shack right by the door, which was almost always open. I texted him back and told him that he really needed to stop texting me and following me around. The text eventually stopped, but he still continued to come to the pool every day and follow me from station to station. I finally decided I had to tell my manager. She said that the next time he came in, they would make sure he was actually a registered member. Sometimes, people would give their friends their member number if they knew there wasn't a photo attached to the account on the computer. Sure enough, the next day, the guy came in. The person at the front desk asked for his ID. The name on the ID didn't match the information on the computer for the member number he gave. And his ID said that he was 27 years old, not 19. I have no idea why, but they let him in anyway. He came right over to my station. As soon as he got about 5 feet away from me, my manager came over and told me to go on my break. When I came back 15 minutes later, she had kicked him out of the club and trespassed him from the property. Thank God for her. Since that incident, I never saw him at the pool again. And I guess that's the end of my creepy pool story. So, for a little bit of background, I'm currently an 18-year-old female, about 5'7", and the youngest child in a very protective family. I have 3 older brothers, an older sister, and parents who are basically professional warriors. Seriously, if I never moved out on my own, I think my dad would be perfectly fine with it, because then he could continue to be the overbearing helicopter parent that he still tries to be in my adult life. I love my dad, but if he knew how to use technology better, he would probably have tracking apps on all of our phones. My mom is a little better, allowing us a bit more freedom, but she definitely has her moments too. I think they are both just convinced that something terrible is going to happen to me if they let me out of the house past 9 at night. So, growing up with parents like these, and with the classic, if you mess with my baby sister, I'll hurt you, older brothers. I'm a very cautious and aware person, to say the least. This story takes place in the fall of 2017, around late August. It was that time of year when it starts to get dark earlier, around 6 in the evening. My mother had asked me to run up to the local grocery store to grab a couple of last-minute things she needed for dinner. She had forgotten to get them when she was shopping earlier in the day. I'm pretty sure the only reason she asked me to go, especially around the time it was getting dark, was because she had no other choice. She had already started cooking and couldn't leave the stove, and my dad was out of the house, which left me as her only option. Well, that and the fact that the store was literally a 5-minute walk from our house. So, she handed me a $10 bill, made sure I had my phone on me, and sent me on my way. Growing up in the same house my entire life, I had made this walk probably 1,000 times. For context, my house is essentially right behind the shopping center where the store is located. There are several ways to get there from my house, but I always take the quickest route, which, much to my parents' satisfaction, also happened to be along one of the main roads in our neighborhood. The store I was going to was in a small shopping center that didn't really have much else in it, especially on the side that I always entered from. My point is just that unless you lived in my direction, there was really no reason for you to be walking over there. Upon reaching the entrance of the store, I saw a very average-looking guy sitting on the bench right outside the automatic doors. He was wearing the orange shirt and brown apron that was the store's uniform, and he was smoking a cigarette. Now, I've had pretty moderate asthma since I was 4 years old, so I always do my best to steer clear of smokers. But seeing as I had to walk past him to get inside the store, I just tried to keep as much distance between us as possible. As I was passing him, we made eye contact, and he said a seemingly friendly hello to me. I offered a small wave and a tight smile in response, and then walked through the doors. One thing that struck me as odd was that my family and I went to this store at least 2 or 3 times a week, and I had never once seen this guy working there before. I did my best to brush it off, though, as I grabbed a few things my mom needed. I figured he might have just gotten hired, or maybe we just coincidentally always happened to come in on the days that he didn't work. That thought quickly slipped my mind as I texted my mom that I was on my way home and left the store. I was met with the now dark sky. I noticed the man was still sitting outside on the bench, his cigarette now long gone. I could only assume that he was on his break. Once again, he greeted me. This time, I said a quiet "hi" in response. I'm naturally a really fast walker, so within about a minute or two, I was stepping out of the parking lot and onto the cracked sidewalk of my street. It was then that I heard footsteps coming up behind me. Since I'm already a pretty paranoid person when it comes to things like this, my heart immediately started to beat a little faster. We had just recently gotten streetlights installed on our street, something we didn't have at the time this incident took place. So, the only light came from the gas station across the street and the porch lights from the houses around me. This only added to my feelings of unease. I stopped walking and heard someone shout "hey" from behind me. I quickly turned around and saw that it was the guy from earlier, the one who was smoking outside the store. He was fast walking up to me, so naturally, I took a few steps back. He noticed this, and then said in a really calm but overly eager voice, "Hey, I just want to talk and get to know you." I was barely 15 years old at the time, and this dude was at least in his mid-30s. It was definitely creepy. Without even responding, I turned around and began to practically run home, really thankful that he didn't try to follow me. Instead, he just shouted some stuff after me that I can't really remember now. It was in a very annoyed tone. As soon as I got through the front door, I told my mom what had happened, and she agreed with me that it was definitely really weird and creepy. We never told my dad about it, and to this day, he still doesn't know. Thankfully, I never saw that guy at the store again, and nothing ever came of the incident. And I'm really glad about that. This all went down about 8 years ago, back in 2009, and I've kept it pretty quiet ever since. I guess I just never knew how to talk about it without feeling that same strange chill all over again. When I was a kid, my dad had a pretty serious gambling habit. It wasn't great for our finances, but one of the side effects was that we were constantly getting comp rooms at these big casino hotels. We'd usually drive out to Laughlin, Nevada for a weekend. I always looked forward to these trips. It was a break from our cramped apartment and the monotony of my school life. Sometimes I'd even meet other kids whose parents were there for the same reason. We'd have these intense temporary friendships, knowing full well we lived in different states and would never cross paths again. Still, it was nice to have a buddy for a game of Marco Polo in the sprawling, overly chlorinated pool. Most of the time, these trips were completely predictable. I'd used a $5 voucher my dad gave me to get a sugary blended coffee drink from the lobby cafe. Then I'd spend the entire day at the pool, swimming until my fingers were wrinkled like raisins, or until I was too exhausted to keep my eyes open. But one particular afternoon, something happened that broke that pattern completely. I was about 12 years old, lounging on one of those white plastic chairs right by the water's edge, trying to dry off in the blistering Nevada sun. That's when a man approached me. He looked to be in his early 20s, maybe 22 at the most, with greasy brown hair and a faded rock band t-shirt. He sat down on the edge of the chair next to mine and started talking to me. At first, he seemed friendly enough, but there was something about his eyes, a kind of intense focus, that made the hairs on my arms stand up. He kept insisting that he recognized me from somewhere. I knew for a fact that he didn't. I had a good memory for faces, and his was one I had never seen before in my life. I politely told him he must have me mistaken for someone else, but he wouldn't let it go. He leaned in a little closer, and the smell of stale cigarettes hit me. He told me he was in the military, on a short leave from his tour in Afghanistan, and he asked if I wanted to come up to his hotel room. He said he wanted to show me his official uniform and all his gear. That's when a genuine alarm bell started ringing in my head. I remember thinking, how stupid does this man think I am? I forced a tight smile and shook my head. No, thank you. I was just about to go for another swim. He didn't seem discouraged. He just nodded and said he would go put on the uniform anyway and then come back down to the pool to show me. The moment he stood up and walked back towards the hotel elevators, I grabbed my towel and made a beeline for the pool attendant. There was a young woman working there, maybe a college student with a bored expression on her face. I told her what the man had said about him being in the military and inviting me to his room. Her bored expression vanished instantly. She looked genuinely disturbed and assured me she would handle it. I went back to my chair, feeling a bit shaky, and waited. About 15 minutes later, the same man came walking back out towards the pool. He was wearing the most ridiculous, fake-looking military getup I had ever seen. The camouflage pattern was all wrong, the kind you buy at a cheap surplus store, and his boots looked like they were made of plastic. He had a patch of an American flag sewn onto the wrong shoulder. He started to walk towards me, a proud grin on his face, but before he could get close, the pool attendant and a much larger hotel security guard intercepted him. They spoke to him for a few moments, and I saw him gesturing frantically towards me. The security guard was not having it. He firmly took the man by the arm and escorted him off the pool deck and back into the hotel. I never saw him again for the rest of our stay. At the time, I wasn't as terrified as I probably should have been. I think I was too young to fully process the potential danger of the situation. But looking back on it now, as an adult, I'm incredibly grateful that my 12-year-old self had enough sense to recognize that something was deeply wrong and to go find an adult for help. It was a small decision, but one that I'm very glad I made. Back when my family moved into our house on a quiet suburban street in Georgia, all of our neighbors introduced themselves by bringing over baked goods, just like in the movies. It was a nice, peaceful, middle-class neighborhood, mostly made up of older white couples and young families just starting out. I mention that because we were the only black family on the entire street. We didn't find it strange. It was just a very clear fact that we were different. I was about 13 at the time, and my older brother was 15. Our backyard was about half an acre and was fenced in, but it was also connected to the backyards of the two houses on either side of us. Each of their yards was about half the size of ours, but we all had separating fences. To paint a picture, there was a T-shaped fence line that divided our three properties. The house to our left was the home of an older man named Tom. He was a skinny guy who, for some reason, always reminded me of Willie Nelson, but without the signature pigtails. He had a habit of being outside shirtless, usually just wearing a denim vest, no matter how hot or cold it was. He was a pretty well-built man for his age, but he also looked kind of frail. At first, we just thought he was a funny, slightly creepy old guy. But as I got older, he started making comments. I played in the backyard a lot with our two dogs, and Tom had a large living room window that faced his backyard, giving him a clear view into ours. Whenever I glanced over in that direction, I would almost always see him standing in that window, just watching me. When he noticed that I had seen him, he would come outside to try and talk to me. I would try to get away and go back inside before he could make it out, but sometimes I was just too slow. I didn't want to make it obvious that I was avoiding him, so I would just walk at a normal pace. But if I didn't make it inside in time, he would yell my name and ask me to come back. I never got too close to the fence. I would always talk to him from a distance. He would ask me about school, what grade I was in, tell me I was pretty, and ask if I was old enough to have a boyfriend. He also once asked me if I had an older sister or any older friends who looked like me. It was definitely weird, but I would just laugh it off nervously. After a few questions, he would stop talking and just stare at me silently with this strange look on his face. I would always make up an excuse about needing to go inside, and he would nod and just stand at the fence, watching me walk all the way back to my house and go inside. This kind of thing happened almost every week. My mom loves to redecorate, so she's constantly changing the decor in our house. During one of her design phases, she decided to get a new sliding glass door for the back porch, which meant she had to take down the curtains in the living room. It took a while for the new door to be installed, and she figured there was no point in putting the old curtains back up if we would just have to take them down again. So, for a few weeks, there were no curtains on the sliding glass door. Our family television was in that living room. I didn't have a TV in my bedroom, so I often watched TV late at night in the living room, usually with my brother. One night, my brother went to bed early, so I decided to watch a movie by myself. Around midnight, I turned off the TV to go to bed. I got up from the couch, turned off the lamp, and as I turned around, I saw another light on. It wasn't in my house, but in Tom's house. It was his living room light, and he was there, standing in his window, just watching me. I told my parents about it the next day, but they just shrugged it off, saying he was probably just a lonely old man. I have a lot of anxiety, so I try to chalk it up to that and forget about it. Not too long after that, dogs started getting sick. I would take them out to play, and they would suddenly start throwing up or having terrible diarrhea. We knew it wasn't their food because we hadn't changed it. We even threw away some new dog treats we had bought, just in case that was the problem, but it didn't stop. Then I started to notice something. Every time I let the dogs out into the yard by themselves, they would run straight over to Tom's fence, jumping up and down and wagging their tails. He would then slowly walk outside, reach over the fence, and feed them treats from his hand. This was really odd because Tom didn't even have a dog. I told my parents, and this time my dad went over to talk to him. He politely told Tom that our dogs were getting sick and asked him to please stop feeding them. Tom apologized and said he didn't realize, and he stopped. The dogs got better almost immediately. A few weeks later, I was coming home from school. My brother was in college by then, so whenever I got home, no one else would be there for a few hours. I had a routine. I would drop my book bag by the front door, go upstairs to change my clothes, let the dogs out of their crates on the back porch, get a snack, and then let them back inside. For some strange reason, on this particular day, I was just unusually excited to see my dogs. So instead of going upstairs first, I went straight to the back porch. As I got to the sliding glass door to open it, I saw Tom. He was sitting on the ground on our porch, right in front of the dogs' cages. I froze. He hadn't seen me yet. I looked over at the door and realized I hadn't locked it when I left that morning. I started to back away as slowly and quietly as possible, but the floorboards creaked. Tom's head snapped around, and he saw me standing there. I turned and ran upstairs to my room to call my parents. My mom was a nurse and couldn't have her phone on at work, and my dad, as usual, just didn't answer. I didn't think it was serious enough to call the police, so I just hid in my room. A moment later, I heard a knock on the sliding glass door. It wasn't a loud or aggressive knock. It was a soft, friendly knock, like he just wanted to talk. I tried my dad's phone again, and this time he answered. I was crying hysterically as I told him that Tom was on our porch. He said he would head home right away, but he was about an hour away. I just sat in my room, shaking, waiting for my dad to get home. The knocking eventually stopped. All I remember is that when my dad finally got home, Tom was gone. I don't know what was said between my dad and Tom after that, but he did stop coming outside to talk to me. He never did stop watching though. He was always there, standing in his living room window. Sometimes, if I was outside, I'd see him through the window, and he would raise his hand in a slow wave, always with the light on behind him, just so I knew he was still there. When I was about 11 years old, my family moved to a house with a lot of land out in rural Virginia. My grandparents had never told my dad this when he bought the property, but the land we lived on was supposedly part of an old, forgotten colonial-era settlement that had been wiped out by disease in the 1700s. There were rumors of an unmarked burial ground deep in the woods behind our house. When I told my best friend, Alex, about it, his eyes went wide, and of course, he believed me instantly. Soon after I told Alex, weird things started to happen. I'm from Virginia, so I know all about the local legends and ghost stories, like the lost colony of Roanoke and things like that. I started to think maybe our land had its own ghost. One evening, my dad came home from work and looked really shaken. He said that as he was driving up our long gravel driveway, he could have sworn he saw the silhouette of a man in old-fashioned clothes, holding what looked like a long rifle, darting between the trees at the edge of our property. Soon after my dad told me that story, I started to see what looked like the same figure. It was always in my peripheral vision, a tall, shadowy man in what looked like buckskin clothing, moving silently through the dense pine forest that bordered our backyard. I had no idea what it was, so at first I just tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. But things only got worse from there. It started small. I would be out in the backyard, trying to practice soccer, and a pinnacone or a small stick would land a few feet away from me, seemingly thrown from the woods where there was no one. It wasn't aggressive. It felt more like a warning, like something was trying to get my attention or tell me to stay away. It was enough to make me stop wanting to play in the yard by myself. I started spending most of my time on our screened-in porch instead. Then I started to hear things. On quiet nights, when the wind was blowing through the trees, I would hear these strange, mournful wailing sounds coming from deep within the woods. It wasn't an animal. It sounded human, but full of a sadness that made my skin crawl. After that, I pretty much just stayed indoors. From that day on, I made a promise to myself that I would never go into those woods alone, and I would always ignore the strange sounds that came from them. Even now, when I go back to visit my parents, I sometimes hear that same sad wailing sound carried on the wind at night. I still don't know if the figure I saw was a real ghost or just a product of an overactive imagination fueled by local legends. But the feeling I got out there, the feeling of being watched by something ancient and sad, was very real. Sometimes, when I look out at the edge of the woods, I think I can still see a dark shape standing there, just beyond the reach of the porch light. And I always make sure to go back inside and lock the door. This happened a few years ago when I was 15. My parents were both working out of the city for the day, and my older siblings were at school, so I was left home alone. I was playing some video games on the main computer in our house, which was set up in the living room. My parents never allowed me to have any electronic devices in my bedroom. They trusted me to stay home alone, but they had strict rules about not answering the phone to unknown numbers and never opening the door for anyone. While I was playing my game, I heard the sound of our front door opening. I was confused because my parents weren't supposed to be home for several more hours. I paused my game and went to check the front door. It was standing wide open, but there was no one there. I yelled out for my mom and dad, but there was no answer. I sent a text to both of them, and they replied that they were still at work. I got a little creeped out, but I tried to rationalize it. I thought maybe they had forgotten to lock the door when they left, and maybe the wind had blown it open. I just decided to go back to the computer and continue my game. That is, until I heard a noise coming from my bedroom. I got really frightened, but my stupid, younger self decided to go and check it out to see what the noise was. I checked the bathroom first, which was next to my room, but it was empty. Then I heard the distinct sound of a zipper opening and closing coming from inside my room. I didn't have a proper closet at the time, because the built-in one had recently been torn out due to a mold problem. Instead, I had a temporary, freestanding wardrobe made of canvas and poles. I crept to my bedroom door and looked inside. Everything seemed fine. I took a few steps closer to the temporary wardrobe and slowly unzipped the canvas flap. As soon as I opened it, my heart started pounding in my chest. There was a man crouched inside, holding a knife. I didn't scream. I just turned and ran. I ran to the living room, slammed my bedroom door shut, and grabbed the house keys and the cordless phone from the kitchen counter. I ran outside, locking the front door behind me to trap the person inside the house. I called the police, and they were able to arrive just a few minutes later. They went through the house and found the man. He had gotten out of my room and was searching the other rooms, trying to find me. Since there was no way for him to get out of the locked house, he was easily arrested. I still have nightmares about that day. What if I hadn't heard him? What if I had just gone to bed that night without knowing he was there? Would I be dead? Who knows? But the thought of it absolutely terrifies me to this day. This happened during the summer of 2001. I had just completed my sophomore year of college, and on a whim, I created a profile on Yahoo Personals. I replied to a few ads and got to chatting with some young ladies. However, most of the conversations just kind of died down after a few messages, and I didn't really hear anything further from them. I just figured they had found someone else or had lost interest. One of the ads I responded to, however, really stood out to me. Her username was Virgin Girl, followed by some random numbers. We lived about 2 hours away from each other. She seemed to take a real interest in me right away, telling me how I sounded different from all the other guys she had met online, and how she really wanted to get to know me better. We began emailing each other and chatting on Yahoo Messenger pretty regularly. However, she seemed to like to talk about sex a lot. She would tell me about some of her past experiences, and it didn't really feel like she was that interested in getting to know me as a person first. It's not that I didn't want to get intimate with her eventually, but we hadn't even met in person yet, and this topic just seemed to come up way too early in our conversations. To be honest, it actually made me kind of uncomfortable, but I just went along with it for the time being. We exchanged a few photos via email, and she seemed to really like mine. However, the one picture that she sent me looked like it was a very old, scanned photo. Then, there was an attachment she sent me that my antivirus software immediately flagged as a virus. Needless to say, I didn't open it. I did, however, mention it to her, but she didn't even say anything about it, which should have been my first major red flag. Her and I got into talking about a couple of things we liked of a more sexual nature. We had also started talking about meeting up in person. She had mentioned that a male friend of hers actually passed through my town pretty regularly, and she suggested that I meet up with him first, to sort of engage in some type of activity to, as she put it, get a feel for me. Now, this was a massive red flag. Why did I have to meet up with some random guy to get to her? What exactly did he plan on doing with me or to me? Something just sounded really off with this whole proposal. I told her that I wasn't into that and that I was definitely not comfortable with it. She then told me it was okay, and instead asked if I would just meet him at a local Walmart and that he would bring me a pair of her panties as some kind of gift. I said that I would, but I had no actual intention of doing this. This was all just getting so weird, and I was really starting to lose interest at this point. It was now August, and the day that I was supposed to meet this dude at the Walmart was approaching. I told her again that I wasn't into this. We chatted for a little bit more, and we eventually just agreed to be chatting buddies on Messenger. However, I just ended up blocking her shortly after that conversation, and I never heard from her again. I'm really glad that I never gave her my phone number or my home address. I also hate to think about what would have happened if I had actually met up with her friend at that Walmart. What I found so strange was that when I tried doing an internet search using the name she had given me, absolutely nothing came up. So, I really don't even know who I was actually chatting with for all that time. Fortunately, a few months later, I did meet someone else on Yahoo Personals, and we actually ended up getting married. So, some good things really can come out of online dating sites. But a little word of caution to everyone: when you're in doubt, always go with your gut feeling. I was about 21 or 22 years old at the time and living by myself in a ground floor apartment. One night, the weather was really pleasant, so I left my bedroom window open to let in the cool air. It was low enough to the ground that someone could get in if they really tried, but the screen was difficult to take off from the outside. And I lived in what I thought was a fairly safe neighborhood, so I didn't think twice about it. I woke up in the middle of the night to the strong smell of cigarette smoke. Half asleep, I reached out to turn on the lamp on my bedside table, and my hand hit what was very obviously a person. My brain fully woke up at that point, and I realized there was a shirtless man standing next to my bed, smoking a cigarette and just staring down at me. I remember letting out a scream and yelling for him to get out of my room. I must have startled him just as badly as he startled me, because he immediately turned, scrambled out of my window, and took off running down the street. I jumped out of bed, slammed the window shut, and locked it. Then, for good measure, I moved a heavy bookcase in front of it. When I went outside the next morning in the daylight, I found the window screen sitting on the ground, propped up against the side of the house. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night, and I haven't slept with a window more than cracked open ever since. I also absolutely refused to live on the ground floor of a building anymore. I don't know if he was planning to rob me or do something much worse, but it was absolutely terrifying. It really makes me wonder how many times something like that might have happened before, and I just didn't wake up. It was scary. This is hands down one of the creepiest experiences of my entire life, and probably the most danger I have ever been in, even though I didn't fully realize it at the time. I'm a 19-year-old female, and I live in a rural area outside of a medium-sized Virginian city. Even though we're only about 40 minutes away from a decently sized city, our area is still very rural and unpopulated. One had been in community college at the time, working towards a nursing degree. Like most young women who hadn't found a good boyfriend or husband yet, I turned to internet dating apps. I was a bit hesitant about doing so, but I really wasn't into the partying scene, and there weren't any guys that I already knew who I was interested in. So, Tinder just seemed like the logical option. At first, I didn't have very much luck. It was pretty bad. The first month I was on there, I got nothing but invitations for one-night stands and creepy guys asking me to do all kinds of horrible things. There were a few guys who tried to act smooth, but it was very obvious that they were only interested in one thing. The only positive thing to come out of it all up to that point was that I had made $50 selling pictures of my feet. You can joke all you want, but $50 is $50. At a certain point, I realized that I either needed to lower my expectations or find another place to find dates. I decided to give one of the less perverted seeming guys on there a try. He didn't wow me very much from his profile, but he seemed like he was a nice guy. He told me that he had a steady job, came from a nice family, and had finished college. We met at a coffee shop in my town, and we hit it off right from the beginning. We were very compatible from the start. He was compassionate, driven, and very smart. Those were all qualities I was looking for in a guy. And, as surprising as this is to say, he looked a lot better in person than he did in his profile pictures. We eventually drove around in his car for a few hours, just so we could talk. And what did we talk about? You might be wondering. Conspiracy theories. It was like the moment we left the public space of the coffee shop, he turned into a full-blown conspiracy theorist nut job. When he first started talking about the government listening to our conversations through our phones, I joked with him and said something like, "Okay, Alex Jones." He did not take kindly to this lighthearted joke, and there was a little bit of tension in the car for a few minutes. Eventually, though, he went right back to blabbering about the government and aliens. I'm not going to lie to you. I was halfway interested in some of the things that he was saying because they seemed at least a little bit plausible. But some of his conclusions just didn't line up and didn't make any logical sense. It was like he could get you from point A to point B, but then he would just jump straight from point B to point X for no reason at all. We eventually got off that topic, and things went back to normal for a short while. We started talking about our past relationships and some more intimate details like that. We really bonded there, and I felt a weird kind of connection with him. As strange as he may have been, I felt like I could be there for him. We had gone on about 2 or 3 more dates before I started asking around about him. I wasn't big into the whole gossip scene, but I always want to know everything I can about someone that I'm dating. Most of the people I asked around town that I knew said that they had never heard of him or met him before. This was a little strange, considering he lived in this small town, and it seemed like he would have met at least a few of these people. The only people that I had found who had heard of him had some really strange stories to tell. One of them went like this. I guess he had rented an apartment that was on top of a beauty salon in town. At least, according to this person, he got really violent one day and started stomping around upstairs and yelling. It wasn't like he was angry at someone. It seemed more like he was trying to talk himself into doing something. And what was he saying? He was chanting, "Kill them," over and over again. The whole thing seemed a little ridiculous to me. I wasn't sure I believed it, and I just convinced myself that this couldn't have been the same guy. Sure, he was a little weird, especially with the conspiracy theory thing, but he seemed like an otherwise normal human being. I kept this in mind during the next 2 or 3 dates we went on. I tried to picture him being the kind of person that would do something like that, flying off the handle for some unknown reason, and I just didn't see it. I couldn't imagine it at the time, and oh, how wrong I was. One Friday night, after I had finished all my homework for the weekend, he texted me. He told me that he wanted me to come over to his house. I honestly wasn't in the mood. I was really tired from my classes and just wanted to be alone for the night. I put my phone down and walked into the bathroom so I could take a shower. When I got out, I had 53 missed calls. I got worried that my mom had died or something terrible had happened. I looked at all the notifications and they all came from this guy. I checked my text messages and he had repeatedly sent me the same sentence over and over again. It said, "I need your help right now," and it was in all caps. Unsure of exactly what to do, I gave him a call. He answered the phone and seemed extremely panicked and worried. I finally got to ask him what was going on, and he told me that he was worried that someone had broken into his house. He couldn't find them. I guess he was home alone, and this had been going on for about 30 minutes by this point. I told him that if he couldn't find someone else in his house, then there probably wasn't anyone else there. It just seemed obvious to me, but he didn't buy it. He was thoroughly convinced that someone was in there with him. He told me that he had heard a door smash open on the other side of the house, and when he rushed over there, the door was wide open. And he thought that whoever had smashed it open was still there, hiding, waiting for him to relax so they could jump out and attack him. I started asking myself whether or not he was in a healthy state of mind. I wasn't sure if I believed that his door had actually been smashed in. Maybe he really is crazy, I began thinking to myself quietly. He kept begging and pleading with me, telling me that I needed to come out there and help him. I didn't have a gun, and I was just some girl. What was I going to do? I decided that I didn't want anything to do with this guy anymore. I blocked him on everything and just kind of hoped the problem would go away. I tried to get my mind onto happier things. I figured that I was just going to watch my favorite movie, The Lion King, and eat some ice cream. Before I left to get the ice cream, my mom asked me if I could stop and get her some cigarettes. I agreed. I was a little happy about it because I knew that I would have to drive by his house on my way to the store that night. I didn't think that he was crazy enough to do anything about it or even notice me, but it still made me a little uneasy to think about being that close to him. There was a lot of traffic about a few minutes ahead of his house, and when I finally passed it, I saw police cars everywhere. My heart dropped into my stomach. I started feeling guilty. I instantly thought that somebody really had broken into his house and had tried to attack him. I pulled over on the side of the road and started making my way towards his house. I asked one of the policemen who was on the scene what was going on. He told me that the guy who lived in this house had taken his own mother hostage and was holding her at gunpoint. I was completely shocked. He wasn't being attacked. He was the attacker. I ran back to my car, slammed the door, and drove away as quickly as I could. That really freaked me out that night. And ever since then, I've wondered what would have happened to me if I had gone over to his house when he had asked me to. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured, and the police got him into custody after a 3-day standoff. He's in federal prison now. It was hands down the scariest experience of my life. But as bad as it may have been, I still have a Tinder profile. I'm 30 years old now, but the memories from my childhood, from the house I grew up in, still haunt me. I grew up in a very old farmhouse just outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. The original stone foundation of the house dated back to the mid-1800s, so there was a lot of history soaked into the floors and walls. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal, or at least that's what my mom says. I saw spirits in that house for as long as I can remember, but there was one in particular that has stayed with me all these years. Just thinking about her makes my blood run cold. My parents and my two older sisters told me that I started talking about the lady in the wardrobe when I was about 3 years old. I would be playing in my room and then suddenly come running out, crying and screaming to them about the old woman in my wardrobe. My dad, being the practical man he was, would always walk me back to my room, open the heavy wooden doors of the antique wardrobe, and show me that nothing was in there besides my clothes and some old blankets. But the moment he would leave and close my bedroom door behind him, I would turn my head, and she would be stepping right back out, as if she had just been waiting for him to go. She was a tall, very thin woman with short, tightly curled white hair. She wore old-fashioned, wire-rimmed glasses that sat on the end of her nose. She always had on the same long, faded floral dress, the kind you'd see in black and white photographs. Her hands were the worst part. Her fingers were long and bony, all bent and twisted out of shape, like the branches of a dead tree. As you can imagine, seeing her was absolutely terrifying for me as a little kid. For years, I saw her. Every time, I would run away, sobbing. Even on the nights she didn't come out of the wardrobe, I could feel her presence in the room. It was a cold, heavy feeling. I don't know why I did it, but sometimes I would force myself to walk over to the wardrobe and peek through the small crack between the doors. And she would be in there, just standing in the darkness, staring right back at me with empty eyes. All of this happened in my first bedroom, which was on the ground floor of the house. When I was about 11, my dad started a big renovation project. He built a whole new section onto the back of the house, and in that new section was a brand new bedroom for me upstairs. When it was finally finished, I was so excited to move out of my old room. Not just because the new room was bigger and had a great view of the fields, but because I would finally be away from that creepy wardrobe and the woman who lived inside it. For the first few weeks in my new room, I slept peacefully. I finally felt safe. The heavy, cold feeling was gone. I was 12 at the time, and I still slept with a nightlight because I hated the dark. I thought I was finally free of her, but I saw her one last time. About 2 weeks after I moved into the new room, I woke up in the middle of the night for no reason. I looked up and my heart dropped into my stomach. There she was, standing in the doorway of my new modern closet, just standing there, perfectly still, staring at me with that same blank expression. I dove under my covers, my whole body shaking with a terror I hadn't felt in years. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying she would go away. After what felt like forever, I peeked out from under the edge of my blanket. I could see the faded floral pattern of her dress. She was standing right next to my bed. I yanked the covers back over my head and didn't move for what felt like hours. I must have eventually cried myself to sleep, because the next thing I knew, it was morning, and she was gone. I never saw her again after that night. Now that I'm older, I sometimes think back on it. It almost felt like she was saying goodbye to me. I wonder if maybe she just wanted to talk, to tell me something. And because I was just a little kid, I was too afraid to understand. If I saw her today, I honestly don't know what I would do. Would I scream and run like I did as a child? Or would I, with my adult fascination for the spirit world, try to find out what she wanted from me all those years ago? To be honest, I'm not sure I want to find out. Even now, at 30, I still get a creepy feeling around old wardrobes and dark closets. I don't know for sure, but I think I'll always feel that way. I'm a 21-year-old female, and about a year ago, I moved into my very first apartment. It was a small 4-unit building, and my neighbors all seemed really nice. I was actually introduced to all of them on the day I moved in. One of my neighbors was a guy named Paul. Paul lived in the unit directly across the hall from me. He was in his 40s, divorced, and seemed to be home all the time. He was constantly outside on the shared balcony, smoking cigarettes and wanting to talk. Now, I'm not an anti-social person. I'm totally fine with talking to people and having conversations. But when I'm at home, I really just want to be left alone with my cat and binge watch The X-Files. Paul, however, seemed to think that any time I opened my door was an invitation to chat. He would talk to me every single time he saw me, often knocking on my door to ask me some pointless question or inviting me over to his place to hang out and have a beer. Last week, soon after I moved in, Paul offered me his Wi-Fi password so that I could use it for my smart TV until I got my own internet set up. It was a nice gesture, I thought. He said the password was just a long, jumbled mess of numbers and letters. So he asked for my phone number so he could just text me a picture of the back of his internet router. Not thinking anything of it, I gave him my number. He sent the picture, and that was that. We hadn't sent any text to each other apart from that one. Then, today, I got a series of texts from an unknown number. The first one said, "You have a secret admirer." I assumed it was a wrong number or a scam and just ignored it. But then another text came through. "Talk to me, Sarah. Yes or no?" He had used my name. Now I was totally freaked out. Against my better judgment, I decided to entertain the texts. I kept my answers short and simple, just trying to figure out who this person was. He started asking me for my preferences, my type in a man, my age preference. It was mildly weird and unsettling, especially since he absolutely refused to tell me who he was. Later on in the text conversation, he said that we should have a secret affair and not tell anyone. He then revealed that he was in his 40s and that we should sleep together. He said that if I agreed, he would always support me financially. My stomach dropped. There's only one person in their 40s who has my phone number. My neighbor. My neighbor Paul, who is always outside, who talks to me any chance he gets, and who I've caught staring at me from his doorway more than once. I texted him back, saying that I was pretty sure I knew who he was. He just insisted that I didn't. He tried to say that he could have gotten my number from a coworker of mine. I work in a hospital, but in my specific department, there are only 5 guys, and not a single one of my coworkers has my personal cell phone number. There is no coincidence in the fact that I got these texts less than 2 weeks after giving Paul my number. So, yeah, now I have a creepy neighbor who propositioned me for sex in exchange for money. And I'm stuck here in a 1-year lease, living about 10 feet away from his front door. Every time I leave my apartment now, I check the peephole first to make sure he's not out there waiting. Great. I was an 18-year-old female when this incident occurred during my first year of university. I was living in the dorms on campus. One afternoon, I was walking to one of my classes when I saw a man walking towards me on the path. There was nothing particularly unusual about his appearance. He was tall, a bit heavyset, and looked to be in his 40s. He was wearing a polo shirt with our school's logo on it, the same shirt that all the campus maintenance and service workers wore. I noticed that he was staring at me. I met his gaze, thinking he would look away, but he didn't. He continued to walk straight towards me, holding eye contact the entire time until he passed me. I didn't think too much of it at the time. Over the next few months, I saw him around campus several times, and the same thing would always happen. He would just stare at me as he walked past, never saying a single word. On one occasion, I saw him in the basement laundry room of my dorm building. Once again, he just walked past me without saying anything. Although his constant staring made me feel a bit uneasy, I didn't let it bother me too much. I just kind of assumed he was a bit odd and left it at that. This went on for a couple of months before anything truly disturbing happened. One night, my roommate was already asleep, and I couldn't seem to quiet my mind. I decided to go for a walk to clear my head. I slipped on my shoes and a jacket and headed outside for a cigarette. Our university campus was officially smoke-free, so I had to walk around to the back of my dorm building to a more secluded spot. As I lit my cigarette, I heard some rustling coming from further down, still near the building, but in a spot that was hidden by some large bushes. I wasn't too worried. The back of my building faced a small patch of woods, and we were used to seeing deer and other small animals wandering around campus. Still, I was curious. I quietly walked over and peeked around the corner of the building. I was surprised to see a man standing there, looking straight up at my building. I squinted my eyes to see better in the dim light, and a jolt of recognition went through me. It was the same man who was always staring at me. What was he doing out here in the middle of the night? His hands were shoved in his pockets, and he seemed to be staring directly up at the windows on the 3rd floor. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I realized he was staring at the general area of my own dorm window. I couldn't be sure exactly what he was looking at from that distance, but it was too close for comfort. I didn't want him to see me, so I quietly finished my cigarette, flicked it onto the ground, and crushed it out with my shoe. Then I headed back inside and up to my room. I took a quick shower and got into my pajamas. I tried to fall asleep that night, but I just couldn't get the image of that man out of my head. Why was he just standing out there staring at the building? Was he really looking into my window? After a few minutes of tossing and turning, I decided I needed to know. I quietly got out of bed and tiptoed across the room to the window. I peeked through the blinds, and sure enough, the man was still down there, and he was staring right up at my window. When he saw my face appear in the window, I honestly expected him to get startled and walk away, but he didn't. He just continued to stand there and stare right at me. I started to feel sick to my stomach at this point. I thought about calling campus security, but I guess he wasn't technically doing anything illegal. He was just standing there. I tried to reason with myself that he couldn't do anything to harm me. My door was always locked, and there was no way he could get through my window. It was on the 3rd floor, and it was one of those tiny windows that only opens a few inches. I crawled back into bed and eventually fell into an uneasy sleep. About 2 months had passed since that night, and I hadn't seen the man since. I was hoping that maybe he had quit his job or had been fired. I wasn't so lucky. One day, I came back from my afternoon class to find my roommate standing in the lobby of our building. She was with 2 police officers. When she saw me, she gasped and ran right towards me, hugging me tightly. She was visibly shaken and seemed terrified about something. I asked her what was going on, and before she could answer, one of the police officers approached me. He asked me to confirm my name and room number. I told him, and then he showed me a picture on his phone. It was the same man who had been standing outside my building 2 months prior. I told the officer that I recognized him, and I explained everything that had happened since the start of the school year. The police officer had me sit down on a bench in the lobby, and he then told me what had happened. Apparently, the man had been sneaking into our room multiple times throughout the year. He had somehow gotten a copy of both my and my roommate's class schedules, so he knew exactly when our room would be empty. He had also placed tiny hidden cameras in the corners of our room. My roommate hadn't been feeling well that day, so she had left one of her classes early. She had returned to our room to find the man standing in the middle of it. She freaked out and immediately called the campus police. The police searched his work office and found that he had stolen multiple things from our room. Things like my underwear. He had even stolen bags of our garbage. It was so bizarre. They also found dozens of pictures of me. Some were taken from a distance around campus, and some were extremely zoomed-in photos of me in my room, taken through the window. The man also had a spare key to our dorm room, which he had been using to get in and out. The man was obviously fired from his job immediately. I'm not exactly sure what kind of legal action was taken against him, but the police assured me that I would never see him on campus again. I've always wondered what his true intentions were, and what would have happened if my roommate hadn't come home early and caught him that day. I guess it's a good thing I never found out. One night, I was watching the horror movie The Conjuring at home with my little sister. We were sitting in the living room, which was next to a sliding glass door that led to our patio. The front door was also very close by. Suddenly, we both heard the distinct sound of a key being put into our front door lock, followed by the sound of the lock turning and the door opening. This didn't really alarm us at first. We knew that our dad had gone out a little while earlier to get some things from the store, so we just assumed that he had returned. "Dad, you're back already?" I casually called out from the couch. There was no response. Dad, are you there?" I asked again, a little louder, thinking maybe he hadn't heard me the first time. Once again, just silence. At this point, I started to get the feeling that something wasn't right. I could tell by the look on my sister's face that she was just as nervous as I was. We looked at each other for a brief moment, and then we heard a few more quiet, scattering sounds from right outside the sliding door. By this stage, I was frozen in fear. I tried one more time, my voice louder but shakier now. "Dad, is that you?" The silence continued. Now I was freaking out. I literally jumped right off the couch. My sister also abruptly got up and started rapidly walking towards the other end of the room, which led to the kitchen. She later told me that she was planning on grabbing a knife. She had this horrified look on her face that I had never seen before. We just stood there, looking at each other in nervous silence. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to make any more noise. I finally decided to walk up to the sliding glass door and begin opening it as slowly and quietly as possible, peering out into the darkness of the patio. When the door was finally opened wide enough, I poked my head out and scanned the area, preparing myself for the worst. To my surprise, there was no one there. But what was even stranger was that when I looked over at the front door, it was still completely shut and locked. My sister and I were obviously both extremely relieved, as we had been almost certain that there was an intruder in our house. After this, I immediately went to ask my mom, who was in her bedroom, if it had been her or if she had noticed anything. She told me that she had also thought my dad had come home, as she had also clearly heard someone opening the front door. About half an hour later, which felt like an eternity as we were still quite shaken from the incident, my dad finally arrived home. He confirmed to us that he had not returned home earlier. To this day, my sister and I still have no idea what happened that night. We don't know what made those sounds, and I guess we never will. I'm 16 years old now, and my family and I live in a duplex. My family consists of my 3 younger brothers, who are all under the age of 5, my 18-year-old sister, and my mother and father. About 3 years ago, when we lived in our old apartment, I was home alone for the entire day. This was pretty normal during the summer. My father worked, and my mom would take the younger kids out to the pool or the park to get them out of the house. I usually just slept in and had a small list of chores to do before everyone got home. One of those chores happened to be laundry. The way our old apartment building was set up, each floor had about 20 apartments and only one shared laundry room. I lived just a few doors down from it, and I had to pass the door to the main stairwell to get there. That stairwell door had a small, wire, reinforced glass window in it. I was in the laundry room, moving clothes from the washer into the dryer, when I heard a strange clicking noise. I wasn't sure what it was. I stopped for a second to listen, but then the sound stopped. I was always a little freaked out by that apartment building, and this definitely wasn't helping. I finished throwing the laundry into the dryer, started it, and then began walking back down the hall to my apartment. As I walked, I heard that same clicking noise again. I froze. It sounded like it was coming from inside the stairwell. As scared as I was, my curiosity got the better of me. I peered through the small window in the stairwell door, but to my surprise, I didn't see anyone. Relieved, I booked it down the hall to my apartment, quickly closing and locking the door behind me. I tried to go about my day, but when it's quiet in that apartment, you can hear everything from the hallway. Conversations, footsteps, laughing, everything. That's where I heard the next sound. I was in the kitchen feeding my cat when I heard slow, heavy footsteps in the hall. It sounded like they were coming down the hall, right towards my apartment door. I ran to the living room and muted the TV so I could listen better. A moment later, there were 3 loud bangs on my door. I was completely crapping my pants at this point, not knowing what to do. I kept the TV muted and slowly crept to the door to look out the peephole. I was horrified at what I saw. It was a tall, skinny, black figure, standing with its back towards my door. I was frozen in place. And then I heard that same bizarre clicking sound that I had heard earlier in the laundry room and the stairwell. I noped the hell out of there, grabbed my cat, and hid in my bedroom for the rest of the afternoon. Later that evening, when my sister got home, I told her what I had seen. She's really into supernatural and paranormal things. When I described the figure to her, all the color drained from her face. She said that she had seen the same figure before, but always in dark rooms or unlit hallways. The next time I encountered it was a few nights later. I was sleeping on the bottom bunk bed, and my sister was in the top bunk. I woke up for some reason and looked at the clock. It read 3:37, and the fan was on, and my nightlight was plugged in. My sister was sound asleep. I heard the clicking again, but this time it was quieter, and it was coming from under my bed. My cat, who was sleeping on my bed, didn't seem to notice it, so I figured maybe I was just imagining it. That was until I saw a long, black, bony arm slowly reach out from under my bed and start making its way up towards my blankets. I let out a yelp, loud enough to wake up my sister, but no one else. She grudgingly told me to shut up because she was trying to sleep. "But you have to see this," I whispered, but when I looked down, the arm was gone. I didn't get another ounce of sleep that night. I have lots of other terrifying stories from that hellhole apartment, but I think most of them revolve around that thing. Ever since we moved, I haven't had any weird experiences. I'm just so glad that thing never followed me to our new house. Thank God for that. When I was in high school, I spent every summer visiting my dad in Arizona. He lived in a sprawling beige-colored apartment complex in a suburb of Phoenix. It was one of those places with a central pool that served as the social hub for everyone living there. My best friend Maria had also moved into the same complex with her younger sister Sophia. That summer, my dad was in the middle of one of his meticulous cleaning sprees, the kind where the entire apartment smells of bleach for days. So he told me to go hang out with Maria for a few hours. We decided to head to the complex pool to escape the heat. Sophia had just had minor surgery a week before and couldn't get her stitches wet. So she tagged along but just sat on a lounge chair playing games on her phone. I also invited another friend, Jessica, who lived nearby. Her father dropped her off and we all jumped into the water. The pool bathrooms were on a timer and set to lock automatically in the early evening. I had to go, so Sophia and I went before they closed. I warned Maria and Jessica to go too, but they both said they were fine. As I predicted, not even 30 minutes after the bathrooms locked, Maria announced she had to go. Since my dad was still cleaning our apartment, she had to walk all the way to the other side of the complex to use the bathroom at her place. It was a bit of a trek. While she was gone, an older couple came to the pool and settled into the jacuzzi behind us. It started taking Maria a really long time to get back, and I began to feel a little worried. I told Sophia and Jessica to stay put while I went to look for her. I finally found Maria walking back towards the pool, wrapped in her towel. I noticed two men walking a short distance behind her, but I didn't think much of it at first. We started walking back to the pool together. The walk took about 10 minutes, and I realized that the two men behind us never changed their path. They stayed at the exact same distance the entire time. A horrible, sinking feeling started to grow in the pit of my stomach. I told Maria to walk a little faster, and we picked up the pace. We got back to the pool before the men did. I immediately told Sophia to gather all of our stuff and move over to the side of the pool where the older couple was sitting in the jacuzzi. The rest of us jumped back into the water and swam to the deep end, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and the entrance. A moment later, the two men appeared at the pool gate. They stood there, looking at the older couple, and then looking directly at us. It was like they were weighing their options. They kept whispering to each other, their eyes darting back and forth between us and the couple. After what felt like an eternity, they turned and left. The whole thing freaked me out. I immediately called my dad. The older couple noticed our distress and asked if we were okay and if we knew those men. We told them no. Our parents were furious when they heard what happened and came straight down to the pool. The police were called, and the older couple kindly waited with us until everyone arrived. When the police finally showed up, we gave them a detailed description of the two men. They searched the entire apartment complex but couldn't find any sign of them. After taking our statements, they left. For the rest of that summer, none of us were allowed to go anywhere without a parent. That's how shaken everyone was. I tried to put the incident out of my mind. That is, until I was a junior in high school, about 2 years later. I came home from school one evening and turned on the news. And there they were. The faces of the two men from the pool were plastered all over the screen. They had been arrested in Miami as part of a major bust of a human trafficking ring. My face went pale. I immediately called Maria. She had seen the news too and was sobbing, realizing they were the same two men who had stalked us that day at the pool. About a month after that, my dad called to tell me that some detectives wanted to speak with me. I was heading down to Arizona for the summer in a few days anyway. When I got there, I found out that Maria, Sophia, and Jessica had all already given their statements to the police. They had also uncovered other reports from around the same time as our incident. 17 other girls in that same area had been stalked by the same two creepy men. They ended up using our statements in court as corroborating evidence to help put them away for a very long time. I am just so glad that my gut instinct was right about those guys. The whole point of me telling this story is to always trust your gut. If you feel like something is wrong, please listen to that feeling. You might not be as lucky as my friends and I were. When I was 11, almost 12, there was this woman living in the apartment directly above us who was a known drug dealer. The night of my 12th birthday, in 2004, she went missing. Not long after that, her boyfriend, a guy named Rick, came down and knocked on our door to ask if he could use our phone. This was a time when not everyone had a cell phone, especially in our neighborhood, so it wasn't a completely unusual request. For a little bit of context, I was home alone at the time. My mom was at work at the diner, just a 5-minute walk down the street. My mom had let our upstairs neighbor and Rick use our phone several times before, so I assumed it was fine and let him in. I brought him into the living room, which was right at the front of our apartment, to use the phone on the end table. He picked up the receiver, dialed a number, waited for a few seconds, and then hung up without saying anything. He did this a couple more times. Then, the heavy front door of the main building slammed open. You could easily hear the front door from where we were. It was a heavy wooden door, and the walls in our old building were paper thin. The way our building was set up, it was a small, old single-family house that had been converted into 3 apartments. My mom and I had the only apartment on the first floor, and our upstairs neighbor's apartment was the only one above us. When the front door opened, Rick's head snapped up. He looked at me and put his finger to his lips, shushing me. "Don't tell anyone I was here," he whispered, his eyes wide with panic. He then walked to my bedroom, which was at the other end of the apartment. I watched as my bedroom door closed just a second before there was a loud, hard police-style knock on our apartment door. My jaw dropped. I walked over and opened the door to see a uniformed police officer. The officer asked me if Rick was there. Being really scared, I stammered out, "Yeah, he just went into my room." The officer asked if he could come in, which I agreed to. As he was stepping inside, he spoke into his radio and then asked if I could let his partner in through the back door and lead them to my room. We started to walk together towards the back of the apartment. The back door was right next to my bedroom door, but we had to walk around the kitchen table to get there. I let the second officer in, and then I watched as they both entered my room. A moment later, they came out, pulling Rick from my bedroom closet. As they brought him out of my room and towards the back door, they told me to go wait in the living room. I walked back to the living room and sat on the couch, shaking. After they closed the back door, I couldn't really hear what they were saying, but I did hear the distinct metallic click of handcuffs. Still terrified, I waited for the police car outside to drive away before I grabbed my keys. I made sure the back door was locked, and then I locked the front door on my way out. I decided to run to my mom's work. I'm pretty sure I cut that 5-minute walk down to about 2 minutes. I've never been a fast runner in my life, but I was fueled entirely by adrenaline and fear. I just really wanted my mom. When I burst into the diner and told her what happened, my mom was so angry. She was furious that Rick had used me like that, hiding out in a child's bedroom closet to try and keep the cops from finding him. She gave me a short but firm lecture that night about not letting anyone into the house to use the phone when she wasn't home, even if I knew them. I don't really want to know what he was wanted for, or what happened to his missing girlfriend. And I really don't want to think about what would have happened if the cops hadn't shown up at that exact moment. When I was around 11 years old, my dad took my little brother and me to a public pool for the day. We spent a few hours there, swimming and playing. The place was pretty big, with a large, sprawling main pool and an area with a gentle, sloping entrance that was sort of like a beach where you could lay out your towel. Everything was fine at first. We were splashing around in the water with all the other kids, just having a normal summer day. But there was this one boy there, probably a year or two older than me, who just would not leave me alone. At first, it was just annoying. He started by bugging me and following me around wherever I went in the pool. That wasn't a huge deal. I was used to playing with annoying kids, and I just tried to ignore him. Then he started touching me. It started with little pokes, and whenever I told him to stop, he would just laugh and say he could touch me wherever he wanted. Then, he touched my chest. I was getting really upset at this point, and was actively trying to get away from him, but he just kept swimming after me. At one point, he went under the water and tried to swim between my legs. No matter what I did or where I went, he wouldn't leave me alone. I finally had enough. I got out of the water and ran over to where my dad was sitting on a lounge chair reading a book. I was out of breath and probably looked pretty distressed because he could tell something was wrong. But when he asked me what was going on, I just mumbled that it was nothing and sat down on the towel next to him until it was time to leave. Later, when we were getting in the car to go home, my dad started telling us about this kid he had been watching who was bothering all the girls in the pool. He said the kid was jumping on their backs and trying to grab them, and that one of the girls had actually turned around and punched him right in the face. I think by the way I was acting, my dad put 2 and 2 together. He looked at me and asked if that was the kid who had been bothering me, and if he had touched me. That's when I finally confessed and told him that yes, he did. My dad was kind of mad that I hadn't said something to him while we were still at the pool, so that he could have done something about it. I don't know why I was so scared to tell him at the time. I think I was just embarrassed and ashamed about the whole thing. For my whole life, I've always felt really stupid for being so affected by that moment. I guess because the person touching me was just another kid. It felt like it shouldn't have been a big deal, but it was terrifying. I felt completely powerless. I guess I didn't realize up until that moment that if someone wanted to come up and touch my body, they could just do it, and there was nothing I could do to defend myself. I really wish I had been like that other girl and punched him in the face, but I guess I was just too scared and just wanted to get away from him. I suppose I should just be glad that's all that happened. I was 12 years old at the time this happened. My family belonged to this private athletic club that had everything you could imagine. There were dozens of tennis courts, indoor racquetball courts, basketball courts, and a huge grassy field with a massive swimming pool right in the center. It was a typical Friday night. My family went to the club, and my friend Zach came with us. We spent most of the evening running around and playing. We were both pretty athletic kids who loved to play basketball. I should mention that I had longish hair at the time and had been mistaken for a girl before, which might be relevant to what happened. I was also wearing some athletic shorts that were probably a little too short, basically short shorts. So, Zach and I had gone into the pool and were playing a game of Marco Polo. After a while, a man got into the water and approached us. He came within about 3 feet of us and just stood there, completely silent, just watching. We didn't think much of it at first. We figured he was probably a dad waiting for his kid, and we were just in his way. As we moved to the side to give him space, I felt a distinct pinch right on my butt. Nothing like that had ever happened to me before, and I was a little too young and innocent to fully grasp what it meant. I whispered to Zach that the dude had just pinched me, and he kind of laughed it off. About 5 minutes later, the same guy came back over to us, and again, he just stood there, staring. Now, Zach and I were starting to get seriously freaked out. This man had pinched me, and now he was following us around the pool. Zach, being the kind of kid he was, decided to test the theory. He swam right past the man to see if he would get pinched too. The man didn't touch Zach. Instead, he got a little closer to me. I took a step backward and then swam as fast as I could over to Zach. This time, as I swam past, I think he tried to grab my butt again, but he only managed to brush his hand against my thigh. I was done. I freaked out and told Zach I was getting out of the pool to go play basketball. He made fun of me, calling me a scaredy cat, but my gut was screaming at me that something was very wrong. We got out of the pool and started walking over to tell our parents where we were going. As we were walking across the small patch of dirt that separated the pool area from the rest of the club, I saw the man getting out of the water and walking in our direction. Based on what had just happened, I completely panicked. I started pulling on Zach's arm, and we ran to the basketball courts. Luckily, there were some older teenagers already there playing, so we just joined their game. I didn't know their ages, but I guess they were around 16. One of them was a girl, and she noticed how distressed I looked. She asked me if something was wrong. In a shaky voice, I told her what happened. There's this man. He grabbed my butt and my thigh in the pool, and I think he's walking over here. The girl asked if I knew where he was now. I just shook my head and said he was on his way. As if on cue, he walked around the corner of the building, and I pointed at him. The girl walked over to her friends, and for a second, I thought they were just going to leave us on our own. But then they all came back over and confronted the man, telling him to leave us alone. Instead of walking away, the guy just went and sat on a bench right next to the courts and started staring directly at me. I know I can't prove it, but I could feel his eyes on me. He was staring at my butt and my crotch for what felt like an hour. He just sat there, not looking at a phone, not doing anything else, just staring. The teenagers eventually left, and as soon as they were gone, the man walked over to us. We took off running towards the tennis courts, and of course, he followed us. After about 30 minutes of this cat and mouse game, he finally seemed to leave. We ran to the main grass field, thinking we were safe, only to find him waiting for us there. This time, he didn't hesitate. He pushed my friend Zach to the ground. Then he grabbed me. It wasn't a light touch anymore. He choked me and pushed me hard up against the exterior wall of the clubhouse. Then he started grabbing me, his hands all over my butt. He was making these really strange, aggressive moaning sounds and saying things like, "Oh yeah, I really like this." He actually tried to pull down my shorts. Thank God I was wearing a belt that day. My friend Zach got up and tried to push the man off me, but it was a weak shove that did nothing. When that didn't work, I took the opportunity while the man was distracted to get out of his chokehold. I bit down on his arm as hard as I possibly could. We ran straight to my parents and told them everything that had happened. The man, for some reason, just walked back towards his car as if nothing was wrong, leaving a trail of blood from his arm along the way. When we got to my mom, she saw the panicked look on my face and the red marks already forming on my neck. She asked what was wrong, if I had fallen. I just shook my head, and the only thing I could manage to get out was, there was a man. My mom got more scared and furious than I have ever seen her in my entire life. She asked me to point him out, and I did. I don't know exactly what happened after that because my parents sent me to go stay at a friend's house that night. I do know the man was arrested, but I don't know any of the other details. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not sure if he thought I was a girl or if he just didn't care. Either way, it is seriously the creepiest and most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. I'd like to preface this story by telling you that I was always a very good kid growing up. My name is Mike. I was always nice to people, and I always followed all the rules. I never drank alcohol, smoked cigarettes, or did any other drugs. I never partied, never even had a girlfriend, or did anything inappropriate with girls. So, when I tell you this story, I want you to remember that this was during a phase of my life when I was really questioning reality and going through a serious identity crisis. With all that being said, let's get into it. So, I considered myself bisexual. I like girls, but I also find some boys attractive. I don't seem gay or feminine or anything else, and if I didn't tell you, you would probably never guess. And it's not all guys. There are just a few that I find myself attracted to. After reading about it online a couple of years back, I realized that it wasn't a big deal. That sometimes you're just attracted to the same sex a little bit. I had never had the opportunity to be with a guy. I had only ever thought about it. I was fairly shy and had a hard time making friends and starting relationships. So I did what any sane person in my situation does. I created a few internet dating profiles. At first, I was only looking for women. I was definitely interested in dating a guy, but I didn't really want to that badly. I knew that there was going to be a certain stigma attached to that kind of relationship in my town. It wasn't like we lived in San Francisco or anything and had that kind of social freedom. So, I knew I was going to be doing myself a favor by simply dating a girl. After a few weeks of trying to find a decent woman, I found myself getting a little frustrated. The women that I met online were horrible. I started simply matching with any woman I could, and all I got were what people call uggos, single moms, and women who were clearly just looking for attention. I remember getting an attitude about it. The women online just seemed like lower quality people, as rude as that sounds, and any of the decent seeming ones never messaged me back. And I feel the need to point out that I'm not ugly or anything. I'm fairly attractive. I'm not Brad Pitt, but I thought I was handsome enough to at least get someone of equivalent looks. I guess I was wrong. I remember getting really excited at one point when a girl agreed to go out on a date with me. She seemed like a real catch and was incredibly attractive. She had no kids and a great job. But then, on the night of our date, she told me that she was having car trouble and that her mechanic needed $500 for the repair. She wanted me to loan it to her, and she promised to pay it back. I blocked her number and gave up on women for a little while. That's when I decided to make a Grindr profile. I mean, I didn't have anything to lose, and I was sure there were plenty of decent guys in the area that could at least keep me company until I could find someone that would be a suitable long-term partner. The very night I installed Grindr, I had a guy who wanted to meet up. He was definitely my type, all muscular and not afraid to take his shirt off in his pictures. We skipped the whole dinner and a movie thing and got right into the action. It was a really fun night, and I enjoyed myself way more than I ever thought I would. That was when I became semi-addicted to one-night stands with guys. Months went by, and I was out doing this every single weekend, and sometimes even during the week. And I remember meeting one guy in particular that changed everything. His name was Fred, and for someone who might be the most malicious person I've ever met, he had a very innocent and unfitting name. He was one of the few guys that wanted to do weird stuff before getting into the physical part. He wanted to do a lot of role play, which was quite unusual and unexpected. He was extremely manipulative, and I don't know why I went along with any of it. For some reason, I just couldn't say no to him. He was sadistic and domineering, and it made me feel horrible about myself. I ended up giving him my number, and we started having regular encounters. He told me that he didn't want me seeing anyone else, that I was only to see him. I couldn't explain it to you if I could. I've thought a lot about this in retrospect. The only thing that I can imagine is that he had been slipping drugs into my system somehow, which may very well have been the case. Whatever the reason for it, he always got his way with me. And then things started to escalate. The foreplay became even more extreme. It started to resemble the really freaky stuff you see on the dark corners of the internet. The kind of stuff that you wouldn't even dream of doing in your wildest fantasies. I remember being choked one time and passing out. I had something in my mouth to prevent me from saying anything or stopping him in any way. I couldn't resist. After that, I tried telling him that I wasn't into this kind of stuff, but he refused to listen. He told me that he didn't care what I wanted. As horrible as that may have seemed at the time, I still didn't really do anything about it. I just let it happen. Things finally climaxed when he tried to force me to kill a dog. He had already psychologically manipulated me in so many ways that I almost did it. It was like he had read a psychology book on how to program someone into obedience, because I'm not going to lie, I came really, really close to doing it. I remember just snapping, punching him in the face, and literally running away from his apartment. I blocked his number and did everything I could to avoid him after that. He has tried to contact me a few times and has even shown up at my workplace a couple of times, but I've decided to stick to a firm no. I told him that I wasn't bi anymore and that I didn't like men, especially him. Looking back on it, the whole experience makes me really sad. It was really traumatic, and I didn't even realize it until long after it had all happened. But he was using the role play as a way to psychologically condition me. And there's a part of me that's really scared that he's going to do it to someone else. I tried calling the police and reporting him before, but I never had any real evidence. I got a restraining order against him last month, and I'm hoping that's the last I ever hear from him. I know all of that went from 0 to 100 really quick, but it's been a while since it happened. And I think, after all this, I'm going to stick with only dating girls, if I even decide to date at all. What people warn you about when it comes to strangers on the internet is 100% true. You should never, ever trust someone you meet online without some serious vetting. And you definitely shouldn't give out your personal information until you've at least had a few video calls. It is just so ridiculously easy to connect with people now. You pull out your phone, download an app like Hinge or Bumble, and suddenly you have a list of every supposedly available person within a 10-mile radius, all without leaving your couch. But about 2 years ago, in 2022, something happened that made me swear off online dating for good. I was 23 years old at the time, living in a small, overpriced apartment in Austin, Texas. I was working a remote data entry job that was slowly sucking the life out of me, and the loneliness was starting to get really heavy. My life had become a predictable loop of work, microwave dinners, and Netflix. So, one boring Tuesday night, I found myself scrolling through Hinge. That's when I saw his profile. His name was Leo. He was tall, had kind-looking brown eyes, dark blonde hair that was just a little messy, and a smile that seemed genuine. His profile was perfect. He had pictures of himself hiking with a golden retriever, one with a group of friends at a brewery, and another one of him looking awkwardly at the camera while holding a massive fish. His prompts were witty, not the usual one-word answers. He seemed smart, active, and normal. We matched instantly. The conversation flowed so easily. There were no awkward pauses or boring questions. We talked about music, terrible movies we both loved, and our jobs. He said he was a software architect, which sounded impressive and stable. Within a day, he asked me out to dinner for that Friday. I agreed immediately. I was genuinely excited, which was a feeling I hadn't had about a date in a long time. On Friday, I spent way too much time getting ready. I took a long shower, picked out a simple black dress that I felt good in, and put on the perfume he had mentioned he liked in his profile. I was a bundle of nerves driving to the Italian restaurant downtown. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting at a corner table. He stood up when he saw me, and he was even more handsome in person. The dinner was fantastic. The conversation never stopped, and he was a great listener. He asked about my family, my goals, my dumb hobbies. He made me feel interesting. After we finished eating, he casually said, "My place is just a few blocks from here. We could go back, have a glass of wine, and maybe watch an episode of that show you were telling me about." I knew the old rule. Never go to a stranger's house on the first date. But he seemed so safe, so normal. I was tired of being cautious and wanted to take a chance. So I said yes. His apartment was a high-rise condo with a stunning view of the city skyline. It was impeccably clean and decorated with minimalist furniture and cool, abstract art. It all fit the image of a successful, put-together guy. Nothing felt out of place. We had a glass of wine and ended up talking for another 2 hours. Nothing happened beyond some light kissing, and when I left, I felt like I was floating. We dated for the next 4 weeks. It felt like a whirlwind romance. We went to a concert. We took his dog to the park. We cooked dinner together at my place. We spent whole weekends just tangled up in his sheets. I was falling for him. I had already started to imagine a future with him. I had never connected with someone so quickly and so deeply. Then came the night that changed everything. We were lying on his couch, watching some random movie, my head resting on his chest. It was a perfectly normal, comfortable evening. In the middle of the movie, he picked up the remote and paused it. He shifted his weight, propping himself up on his elbow to look down at me. "Hey," he said, his voice soft. "Can I tell you something weird?" "Of course, Leo. What is it?" I answered, looking up at him, expecting some cute confession or funny story. He looked me right in the eyes. His face was completely serious, totally blank. There was no trace of a smile or any emotion at all. He reached down and gently took my hand, running his thumb over my knuckles. "When I first saw your profile on Hinge," he said, his voice a calm, even monotone, "my original plan was to kill you on our first date. But then I met you, and I changed my mind. I actually like you." A freezing cold wave washed over me. I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. I was sure I had misheard him. It had to be a joke, a really sick, twisted joke. But the look on his face, the complete lack of any humor in his eyes, told me he was dead serious. The way he was still caressing my hand while saying the most horrible thing I had ever heard made my skin crawl. I was completely paralyzed. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. My mind was just a mess of static and panic. He leaned in a little closer, his face just inches from mine. "Maya?" he whispered, as if he was confused by my silence. That's what snapped me out of it. Adrenaline flooded my system. I pulled my hand away and scrambled off the couch, grabbing my purse from the floor. I didn't say a word. I just ran. I fumbled with the lock on his front door, my hand shaking so badly I could barely turn it. I didn't look back. I just ran out of his apartment, down the hall to the elevator, and didn't stop running until I was locked safely in my car. I drove home in a daze, looking in my rearview mirror every 10 seconds, terrified he was following me. As soon as I got inside my apartment, I blocked his number, blocked him on all social media, and then I deleted the Hinge app entirely. So, to Leo, that incredibly handsome and terrifyingly crazy guy from the dating app, I truly hope I never see you again for the rest of my life. And I wonder, every single day, if you found someone else and didn't change your mind that time. What follows is a list of every incident that has led me to believe that my family and I are not alone in our house. And to be clear, I mean we have a ghost, not a person secretly living in our walls. For some background, most people who know me would say I'm superstitious, and there's no doubt that I am. But these are things that most, if not all, of my family members have experienced while living in this house. It's a 1960s suburban home on Maple Street. A simple, one-story house with a finished basement. There's little to no dramatic history behind it that we know of. No one died here. No one took their own life, and the house itself is relatively young. The neighborhood is even considered a really safe one. We do, however, live down the street from a large funeral home. And of course, I've always let my imagination run wild with that little detail. The first incident happened when I was about 8 years old. I was the oldest of 3 sisters. My dad had just finished putting us to bed and was still in our room, quietly putting away the storybooks he had read to us. My mom was in their bedroom, which was right down the hall, watching television. Since the house was a smaller model, you could pretty much hear everything from anywhere inside. The point is, we all knew exactly where everyone was. Mom was in the master bedroom, and the rest of us were in our bedroom. Suddenly, from the kitchen, there was a loud bang. It was a single sharp sound, as if something heavy had been dropped onto the linoleum floor. My dad, thinking out loud to himself, said, "Hey, I thought your mom was in the bedroom." I told him she was. He went to check on her, and sure enough, there she was, still in their bed, watching her show. He then went into the kitchen to investigate the source of the noise. That's when he found one of my mom's biggest, heaviest cookbooks. It had somehow moved from the high shelf where it was kept and was now sitting perfectly upright on the bottom rack of the dishwasher, which had been left open because no one had finished loading it yet. Now, this could easily be explained away by gravity, and I encourage you to try, because that's what I've been doing my whole life. But something about it just felt wrong. That cookbook was one my mom hadn't touched in years, and the shelf it rested on was directly above the dishwasher. However, there was a whole section of countertop between the shelf and the open dishwasher rack. For it to have landed inside the rack, it would have had to fall, bounce off the counter in a perfect angle, and then land upright. If it had bounced, we would have heard two distinct sounds, but we only heard one. I don't know what happened, and I guess in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. But it was just the beginning. The second event I remember was pretty similar, and also took place in the kitchen. My family had gone to the movies, but I had stayed home because I was feeling sick. I was washing some dishes to pass the time. I was about halfway through scrubbing the plates when I glanced over at the stove. I noticed my mom had left a green soup ladle sitting on top of a crumb-covered baking sheet. It was balanced there, but not very securely. I mentioned this because as I put down the sponge to go and grab it to wash it, the ladle started to roll slowly towards me. I wasn't sure what I was seeing at first. It rolled to the edge of the baking sheet, and just before it fell off, I whispered, "Nope," to myself, and walked right out of the kitchen to go find something else to do. I ended up coming back into the kitchen with my cat a few minutes later to finish the dishes. The ladle was still there, resting right on the very edge of the baking sheet. It gave me the creeps for the rest of the night. The third event was on an already stressful night. My mom was in extreme pain from what she thought was a kidney stone, and my dad had rushed her to the emergency room. He had called my grandfather to come and watch over us, but my grandparents lived a good 30 minutes away, so it was going to be a while. In the meantime, I was supposed to watch over my two younger sisters, who were both crying hysterically. While I was trying to get them to calm down, I heard something from the dining room that made me stop dead in my tracks. My sisters got quiet and listened with me. We heard footsteps, heavy bootsteps, like a man wearing steel-toed construction boots. They seemed to be coming from the dining room, sometimes getting closer, sometimes moving further away, as if someone was just pacing in circles. I didn't even dare to look. I just quietly closed the bedroom door and locked it, telling my sisters we had to be silent and wait for our grandpa. He arrived a little while later. My dad had left the front door unlocked for him, so he walked right in, calling out for us. The moment he entered the house, the bootsteps miraculously stopped. He found us huddled together in the living room, and the rest of the night was quiet. The fourth event didn't happen to me directly, but to my younger sister, who was about 12 at the time. She had always had a lot of nightmares and would often wake up crying, coming to me for comfort. I know I was the world's worst older sister, but I hated being woken up and would usually just tell her to go back to sleep. After a while, she took the hint and stopped waking me up, until this one night. It was summertime, probably around 1 in the morning, and everyone was asleep. I was suddenly woken up by my sister shaking me roughly and whispering my name. I asked her what was wrong, assuming it was another nightmare, but she shook her head and told me she heard the basement door open and someone climbing up the stairs. I told her it was probably just mom or dad. She started crying, saying she hadn't even fallen asleep yet, and she knew for a fact that both of our parents were in their bedroom. Being a little scared myself now, we both lay there in the dark, listening. We heard the sounds of a cupboard door swinging open in the kitchen, and the rustling of packages being moved around on the countertops. We would whisper to each other every few seconds. "Did you hear that? Was that the cereal box?" Around 2 in the morning, the sound suddenly stopped. The next morning, nothing was out of place in the kitchen, and we confirmed with our parents that neither of them had been up during the night. The last several events have been more recent. My sisters and I began to develop a fear of going into the basement alone, specifically the laundry room and my dad's office. The laundry room is understandable. It only has one single, bare light bulb, and it's filled with so much junk that it would be a great hiding place. But the office is my dad's man cave, and there's no reason for it to feel ominous, except that it does. If you're down there by yourself, you always get this intense, prickly feeling, like someone is watching you from the doorway. My electric piano is in that room, and whenever I would go down there to practice, I always had to leave the door wide open. Closing it felt like I was trapping myself in there with something. Even then, I could only get through about 5 songs before the back of my neck would start to burn with the feeling of being watched. I'd apologize to the empty air and leave the room, feeling better the second I was back upstairs. My sisters have had similar feelings. One of my sisters loves to use the computer down there to draw, but she can only do it if my dad is in the room with her, because she always feels like someone is standing right behind her chair. My youngest sister refuses to go into the basement at all without someone else down there. There have also been multiple times when I've gotten out of the shower only to find small handprints on the fogged up mirror. A friend told me this was a natural phenomenon, but what's odd is that the handprints are always way up high. They're small, about the size of my youngest sister's hands, but they are so close to the ceiling that even I would need a step stool to reach that high. On 3 different occasions, while brushing my teeth before bed, I've suddenly gotten that same leave now feeling from the basement. The first 2 times, I ignored it. On the 3rd occasion, I felt a sharp tug on the back of my t-shirt. It felt exactly like someone had grabbed a handful of the fabric between my shoulder blades and pulled it hard. Needless to say, I ran out of there. A similar thing happened one night when I was walking past the living room. I felt that same prickly feeling of being watched, but this time, I felt someone shove me from behind. The force was hard enough to make me stumble. I spun around, thinking it was one of my sisters, but there was no one there. The last event is the most chilling to me. I fell asleep one night and had a terrible dream. It was all based on a feeling, not sight. It was just a black void with these horrible voices chanting nasty things at me. I woke up with a start, and I was facing my closet, which I never do. The very next second, I heard a tiny childlike voice whisper right in my left ear, "Hi." I shot up in bed, my hand clamped over my ear, and started freaking out. I got up, closed the closet door, and lay awake for the rest of the night, praying I wouldn't hear anything else. The next morning at breakfast, I told my sister about it. She looked at me with a strange expression and said that she had had the exact same dream, only she hadn't heard the voice when she woke up. It's these events that have made me believe we are not alone in this house. Dear God, I cannot wait to move out. To start this story, I have to admit that I was a very naive teenager. The first 12 or 13 years of my life were very sheltered. I grew up in a tiny rural community and went to a school that had fewer than 100 students in the entire building. We moved when I was about 14 to a much larger suburban area, and it was at that new house where I met the neighbor in question. I didn't realize it until recently, when I was really thinking about that period of my life, that he was trying to groom me. I really could have been a potential victim of his. It's been about 12 years since then, and I've only now just realized what he was trying to do. When I was 14, we packed up our lives and moved. We settled into a house in a quiet cul-de-sac, and I started at the local high school. My mom found a new job and she worked a lot, so she was out of the house quite a bit. I had an older brother, but he was 20 at the time and was always out partying and staying at his friends' houses, so I saw him even less than I saw my mom. I met the creepy neighbor the day after we moved in. His name was Mr. Henderson, and he lived 3 houses down from us. because it was a sleepy cul-de-sac. He had seen the moving trucks and all the activity. He came over and introduced himself to my mom, presenting her with a freshly baked apple pie. He asked if there was anything he could do to help us get settled. Normally, my mom is very wary of new people, but she seemed completely comfortable around Mr. Henderson. He put her at ease, even making her laugh. He helped us move some of the larger pieces of furniture and gave my mom the contact information for local plumbers and electricians. He was, in short, extremely friendly and helpful. At first, he mostly kept to himself. For the first few months, if I walked past his house and he was out in his meticulously kept garden, I would say, "Hello." He would always stop what he was doing and ask me a lot of questions. He asked about school, my friends, which teachers I liked and which I didn't. He seemed genuinely interested. I didn't think much of it. He was just being a polite, neighborly old man. He soon figured out my mom's work schedule and realized that I was home alone a lot after school. Then, he became bolder. One day, I was walking home from volleyball practice. It was a really hot day, and he was out in his garden. He called out hello to me and asked if I had enjoyed practice. Then he invited me inside for a glass of cold lemonade. I told him that I needed to get home and start dinner for my mom, but he insisted, saying it was just one glass of lemonade and I had nothing to worry about. That day started a new routine. Most days after practice, I would stop by his house for a drink. He was really easy to talk to. He wasn't like any of the other adults in my life. Looking back on it, he seemed to respect my intelligence in a way no other adult did. He wasn't condescending, and he wasn't a rule enforcer like my teachers. He also started dropping by my house. On the rare chance that my mom got off work early, or if it was her day off, he was nowhere to be seen. If my brother was home, not a peep out of him. But if it was an evening and I was home alone, he would almost always come by. He was a great gardener, so he would often bring me fresh herbs from his garden for whatever I was cooking for dinner. He would also pick flowers for me from his garden. Every time I thanked him, he would say something like, "That's what friends are for," or, "You deserve flowers, you work so hard in school." One time, he even said to me, "Pretty flowers for a pretty girl." That one went right over my head. I just thanked him and put the flowers in a vase. Somehow, he found out when my birthday was. About 2 days after my 15th birthday, when I was once again home alone, he came by and gave me a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet. When I told him I couldn't accept it, he shushed me and said, "Nonsense. This can be our fun little secret. You can only wear it when no one else is around. It can be our special thing, and you can think of me when you're wearing it." Despite all the massive red flags, I didn't think much of it. He was my friend, the nice neighbor who was looking out for me. I got a few more gifts from him over time, always with the same instruction that it was our little secret, and that no one else needed to know, because they wouldn't understand our special friendship. Then, one day, he hugged me. I had gone over to his house to help him bring in some groceries, and as I was leaving, he pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a normal hug. It lasted too long, and I'm almost certain he sniffed my hair. I remember feeling like it wasn't right. I was 16 by that point, and we had been friends for 2 years. He tried to convince me to stay longer, but I had to literally spell it out to him that I needed to go home. I ran the short distance back to my house. I must have looked upset because my brother, who was home for once, actually asked me what was wrong. I didn't tell him about the neighbor. I made up some story about some kids down the street being mean to me. For the next few weeks, my brother became very protective. He wouldn't let me leave the house without him. I think he sensed something was wrong, even if he didn't know what. The neighbor, seeing that my brother was always with me, backed off completely. We moved about 2 months after that. My mom got a better job, and we could afford a nicer house in a different town. I shudder to think what would have happened if I had stayed in that house on the day he hugged me. It makes me sick to think that I ate and drank things he gave me. I can't believe I was so easily fooled. I'm just so glad we moved away. I work as an anesthesiology resident, and as part of the job, we are on the hospital's cardiac arrest team, or the code team. When a code blue call goes out over our pagers, we have to drop everything and run there as fast as possible. The hospital where I did my residency, Northwood Medical Center, is a fairly new building, all glass and steel and modern efficiency. But it's connected by a long skywalk to the old hospital building, a massive brick structure that used to be a tuberculosis sanatorium back in the early 1900s. The old building is mostly empty now, a place for storage and administrative offices, but it still has a few active wards on the upper floors for long-term care patients. It's a creepy place, and a lot of the staff have stories about it. I've had some strange experiences working nights in hospitals, but one night in that place shook me so badly it made me question my very scientific, logical understanding of the world. I was in the middle of a grueling 24-hour shift. It was around 4 on that dead hour when the hospital is at its quietest and your body is screaming for sleep. My pager went off with a piercing shriek. Code Blue, Hickory Ward, old sanatorium building. I took off at a dead sprint. To get to the old building, you have to cross the skywalk. It's this long glass wall bridge that connects the 4th floor of the new hospital to the 3rd floor of the old one. It's about 500 meters long and suspended high above the ground. At night, it's completely dark except for a series of motion-activated lights. As you run through it, sections of the bridge light up in front of you with a low hum, each about 20 meters at a time, creating these isolated pools of yellow light in the darkness. I was running as fast as I could, my footsteps echoing in the enclosed space. The lights flickered on ahead of me, illuminating the path. About halfway across the bridge, I almost ran headfirst into someone. The lights ahead of me clicked on, and standing there, walking slowly toward me from the direction of the old building, was a man who looked like a patient. He was a very distinct-looking man. He had wild, unkempt white hair that stood out in all directions and a big, bushy mustache that was stained yellow, probably from smoking. He was wearing a standard issue, pale blue hospital gown, and a tarnished-looking brass medallion on a leather cord was poking out from the hairy fifth of his chest. But the most memorable thing was a large, dark, hairy mole right on his left cheek. He looked confused and frail. "Excuse me, Doc, can you help me?" he called out, his voice a dry, scratchy whisper. I slowed down for just a second, still jogging in place, my adrenaline pumping from the code call. "I can try, but I have to be quick." "I'm on my way to an emergency," I said, a little out of breath. "Yeah, I was just wondering," he said, shuffling a bit closer. "Could you tell me where they put the new morgue?" The question struck me as incredibly odd. Why would a patient be looking for the morgue at 4 in the morning? But I was in too much of a hurry to think about it. The new hospital's layout was still a bit confusing to me, especially the non-patient areas. "I'm not exactly sure," I said quickly. "You'll have to ask someone at the main reception desk on the other side of this bridge. They can direct you." "Sorry, but I really have to go." I didn't wait for a reply. I just took off running again, not looking back. For a split second, the strangeness of the encounter registered, but then my focus was back on the code. I had a patient to save. I burst onto the Hickory Ward, and the nurses were already directing me to the patient's room. I could hear the rhythmic pressing of chest compressions. As I made my way to the bedside, the nurses were already performing CPR. I pushed through to take over the scene, and then I saw the patient's face. My blood ran cold. It was the same man from the bridge. The exact same man. The same wild white hair, the same bushy mustache, the same prominent, hairy mole on his left cheek. I pulled back the sheet just enough to see the pale blue hospital gown and the tarnished brass medallion poking out from his chest. I'm not talking about someone who looked similar. It was, without a single doubt, the same guy I had just passed on the skywalk, who was walking in the opposite direction. We worked on him for 25 minutes. We did everything by the book, pushed every drug, but we couldn't get his heart to start again. He was gone. I had to be the one to call the time of death. I had crossed paths with that man's spirit on the bridge. He was already dead or dying, and he was looking for the morgue. To this day, the thought gives me absolute chills. I've had to cross that skywalk hundreds of times since then, and every time, especially at night, my heart pounds in my chest. Every time those motion sensor lights click on, I brace myself for what I might see in that next pool of light. I've had a few other strange, unexplainable things happen in the old sanatorium building, but none of them were as real, as visceral as that one. None of them are burned into my memory, like the night I gave directions to a ghost. This was around 7 years ago when this happened, and I never really felt like doing anything about it or even talking about this experience. But I just wanted to explain my story so that others might understand how dangerous it can be to meet people from online. I was meeting up with this guy from a dating application. It might have been OkCupid or Tinder, but I highly doubt it was Tinder. The guy looked pretty normal from his profile pictures, just a very average looking guy. I was a curvy 21-year-old female at the time. The place that I'm originally from is a really small town, so it was always pretty hard for me to meet new people. I'm not much of a social person, so this was just how I met people. I had done it all the time, so I mean, what could really go wrong? Anyway, we had exchanged a few texts back and forth, and then we exchanged phone numbers. He had told me to meet him at the house that he was currently renting. This was probably around 1 in the afternoon, so I didn't really think anything of it since it was in the middle of the day. The only strange thing was that the house was in a very secluded, small town, a place where I'm pretty sure almost everyone was at work during the day. I walked up to the address he gave me after parking my car on the street in front of it. It just looked like a small, unassuming house, nothing too creepy looking. I walked up to the front door, and I didn't even have to knock. The guy came right out of the house. He didn't invite me in at first, but then he held the door open for me. When I stepped inside, I saw that the house was almost completely empty. It looked like it was being used for storage or something. This probably should have been a massive red flag, since everything was covered by dusty white cloths, except for a single airbed on the floor in the living room. He could basically see how uncomfortable I was, and he suggested that we could take a walk if I wanted to. We just walked around the neighborhood, but it was a mostly dead and deserted one. There was a small, run-down baseball field there, and we just kind of sat on the bleachers, not even really talking that much. We were just standing there near the dugout, and then out of nowhere, he started to try and force me down onto the ground. I tried to fight him off. I thought I would be stronger than him, but I'm still a relatively weak person, and he was already starting to pull my pants down. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't get any sound out. I managed to get loose from his grip though, and I scrambled away from him and ran out of the baseball field while pulling my pants back up. I ran as fast as I could to my car, got inside, locked the doors, and peeled out of there. Luckily, the guy didn't follow me. I never ended up reporting this to the police because I was just so shaken up about it. I know I'm a pretty stupid person for this, but a few days later, I drove back there. There were a couple of other people standing in the front yard of the house. They looked so shady and creepy to me. I rolled down my window and asked them if they knew the guy that lived there. That's when they told me that they had never heard of him, and that no one was even living in that house. Then, the same two guys started to walk towards me and tried to get me to get out of my car. But I just slammed on the gas and drove off. I honestly don't really know why I wanted to drive back there in the first place. I guess I just wanted some kind of confirmation on what had actually happened. I did report his online profile, but it was like this guy was a ghost or something. The profile was deleted. No one in that area seemed to know him, and I couldn't find him anywhere else online. Like so many others have said before me, just be really, really careful of the people you meet online, and always meet in a very public place for the first time. You'll thank me later.